across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is the Evening Exchange, first one of the week. It's Monday evening. So much to discuss, not just what's happening today, but what happened over the weekend. Those talks breaking down between Iran and the United States, and all the fallout of all of that as well. Also, Trump depicting himself as Jesus. What on earth went on there? He said he thought he was a doctor. I'm afraid I don't believe him. We're also talking about the Strait of Hormuz, what's happening there, and what happens next. Starmer talking about this today. He's going to have a summit of leaders, including Macron, this week. On the debate desk, Phil Dave and Viggo Turling will talk about that damning report about Axel Raducabana, the Southport murderer. We'll talk about the Boris wave as well, not just on the debate desk, but with the immigration minister who was around when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. That's Kevin Foster. He's coming up later. EU betrayal too, anti-Semitism at universities. Fascinating student we're going to speak to a little bit later on to see what's happening there. We'll go stateside too to talk about Trump too. As always, anything you want to talk about, anything we're missing, anything you think we should be talking about, you let me know, and your opinions on the big stories of the day. This is my show, but it's your show too, and I want to get your voice on the air between now and 10 o'clock. Plenty of time for calls, because yeah, we've got some great guests coming up, but you are the most important people in this show. Not me, not my guests, you at home. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, all on the main number, 0344 499 1000. Let's get started and talk to Edmund Fitton-Brown, the former ambassador to Yemen, my favourite analyst of the Middle East, about what on earth is going on and what happens next. Also, the implications here at home as well, economically, we'll delve into in the show today, because it's not just about what's going on thousands of miles away, it's how it affects each and every one of us in our pocket. So much to discuss between now and 10 o'clock. Stay with me here on Talk. Well, the big controversy of the day is, of course, about the US blockade of Iran. But another element of this is something that Donald Trump put out on AI. And he talked to Fox News about it. He denies that it's him as Jesus. It's offended a heck of a lot of people in America and around the world. He's also criticised the Pope for being soft on crime. Interesting one there. Let's see what Donald Trump's been saying.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example, the 11,000, I understand your husband's going through treatment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's going through some very serious cancer treatment, so
yes, sir.
This goes a long way.
Yes, sir, it sure does.
Yeah.
Many questions about what Donald Trump meant, what his thoughts were on that, and why that image made it into the public domain at all. Not the biggest issue today, but certainly one that's taking a lot of people by surprise, especially many people who, of course, just after Easter, many Christians feel it's not a reasonable thing to put out. What do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. On the big issue of the Strait of Hormuz blockade, let's see what Donald Trump said about that.
I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. Their whole Navy is underwater. You know that. 158 ships are gone. Their Navy's gone. Most of their mine droppers are gone. We have a lot of people, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. And that will be very effective. But what we want to do is we want to, and again, we don't need this. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait.
Donald Trump speaking yesterday, and here in the UK, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in the House of Commons today, talking about how UK minesweepers and anti-drone capabilities will continue operating in the region. British naval ships and soldiers will not be used to block Iranian ports. The UK not involved in enforcing the US military blockade of Iran after those talks broke down. 21 hours without a deal, but actually after 47 years of diplomatic deep freeze, maybe it was going to take a lot longer than 21 hours. We'll talk to Edmund about that in a second. Just before we do, let's hear what Starmer has said about this in the House of Commons this afternoon.
Strait of Hormuz, shamefully exploited by Iran. All of the leaders that I met were crystal clear that freedom of navigation is vital and must be restored. No conditions, no tolls, and no tolerance of Iran holding the world's economy to ransom. Because, Mr. Speaker, the impact of Iran's behaviour in the Strait is causing untold economic damage. It's visible on every petrol forecourt in the country. My guide from the start of this conflict has always been our national interest. That's why we stayed out of the war and why we continue to stay out of the war. And that is why we are working now to restore freedom of navigation in the Middle East, because that is squarely in our national interest.
Lots more to discuss on all of this. There's so much that has happened since we last spoke to one another on Friday evening on the Evening Exchange. I'm delighted that Edmund Fitton-Brown is with me now, the former ambassador to Yemen. He is the man who just makes it all make sense, if indeed it can be made sense of. Edmund, just talk us through the last few days, because we had these talks in Islamabad between JD Vance and others and the Iranians. They broke down after 21 hours. No sign of any more talks necessarily happening anytime imminently anyway, although Trump has said that Iran has called them to say that more will happen. Was it just probably totally unrealistic to think, okay, 21 hours, that's a long time to negotiate, but after 47 years, you're not going to solve this conflict in 21 hours?
No, indeed, and great to be with you, Peter. I think that's fundamentally true, that there's an awful lot of bad blood that needs to be dealt with. And the other point, of course, is that the two sides were so far apart in terms of their negotiating positions, we could see no real overlap between the two. So the failure of the talks in Islamabad was no real surprise. What's interesting, of course, is this new initiative by President Trump to again, there's an issue here with his communications, isn't there? You mentioned it earlier, these sort of very wild things that he says or posts, and it can be confusing. Now,
they seem to me to be getting wilder.
They do sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that, especially that absolutely appalling post about a civilization will die tonight. I mean, that was on a level that I'd never seen before. But of course, this is actually a practical problem too, because if you are an ally of the United States, as the United Kingdom is, it's actually very difficult to work with that. So you don't have a clear communication of what it is you're working with. Your own media efforts, of course, are hopelessly undermined by those kind of communications. And there are even legal implications, because if he says something that is transparently illegal, how are you supposed to support it? So I think that's part of the problem. Now, where it comes in on the Strait of Hormuz at the moment is he is happily talking about a blockade. That isn't really what the Americans are doing. I mean, a blockade is part of it, but it's meeting an Iranian blockade, and they are also clearing the mines in the Strait. And so it would be much better if he was talking about looking for means of forcing the Iranians to back down from their blockade. In other words, we're seeking to open the Strait, not we're seeking to close it.
Yes, it's fascinating that you mention that, because I think there is a lot of confusion over what is actually happening now. Also, the UK rule, as we heard from Keir Starmer there, will not be involved in enforcing the US military blockade, if that's even the right word. UK minesweepers and drone capabilities continuing. The US stopping, at least attempting to stop, the Iranians. But Sir Keir, who has recently returned, obviously he came back on Friday from the Gulf, said he'd been working with allies to keep the Strait open. So tell us about those diplomatic efforts that are happening over the next few days. We know Macron is involved and other nations too. if you have this with the Ukraine war, for example, you have the coalition of the willing, you have various people who are trying to get things done. What if any role does Starmer have here? And can Britain actually be a broker, perhaps even an honest broker, in regard to the situation, in your opinion, Edmund?
I think he does have a role, and I think it's worth him making the effort. I'm not so sure about Macron, because I tend to find the French a bit more self-serving in these things. But again, to be fair to the French, they are one of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. They do have a global role, and therefore it's not unreasonable for them to try to play it. I think the reason it's really important to keep this diplomacy going is because what we're trying to do is it's an elusive target of trying to dock with this very erratic American policy. But ultimately, I think we're all agreed on a number of things. We're certainly not on Iran's side in any of this. I don't think anyone is suggesting that. And we certainly want to see the Strait reopened, and for world trade and oil to be able to flow again. So what's needed is for a coalition which is able to work with whatever the American objectives are without necessarily taking part in the American military operation.
Yes, that's a very interesting point as well. So what happens now? I mean, is this ceasefire actually holding, do you think, or is the ceasefire over? I mean, what is your assessment of what is happening right now? And will there be, have you any hopes for any further diplomatic efforts between the US and Iran, especially in light of what's happened in the last few days?
So it's holding at the moment. The ceasefire is holding at the moment. In that respect, you can read Trump's latest initiative as an attempt to wave an even bigger stick at the Iranians, because actually the impact of stopping the Iranians from exporting any oil could be enormous. First of all, it would stop their export earnings. Secondly, their storage would very rapidly back up once they can't actually ship the oil, and that then has knock-on effects on the production of the fields, because the fields can very quickly degrade if they can't continue to produce. So the Iranians probably have to take this seriously. This is going to threaten their economy. It's going to threaten their currency. And I think there's an element here of Trump still looking for his deal. He wants the Iranians finally to say, okay, I think he's now checkmated us, and we'll offer a few more concessions, and then maybe you get a second round of talks that can still work. And there is still a window of the 2 weeks that is still left over. But there is another side to this, of course, and that is that if the Americans' enforcement in the Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, then attracts fire from the Iranian side, which it may well, we could then be straight back into hostilities.
Let's just talk a little bit about what President Trump has said about Leo XIV, the Pope. He has branded him weak on crime, terrible on foreign policy, and also uploaded an AI-generated image of himself, of Trump, as Jesus. We can see it on the screen there if people are looking there. Now, he has said that it was him as a doctor. I think that's probably quite difficult as a bit of a stretch. But as someone who has been, a long career in diplomacy, Edmund, if you were in the service at the moment and were asked to kind of react to that as a partner of the Americans, how would you deal with that? We're dealing with a president who is not quite connected to the matrix in some ways. There are some times when he does and says things that are so undiplomatic that I would imagine for a system that's not ready to cope with that, even though it's coped with him before for 4 years and now for nearly 2 years in a second term, these curveballs keep coming, don't they?
They really do. And although I don't have a long career in medicine, I've certainly never seen a doctor dressed like that. Yeah, this is really tricky. I mean, the US is still absolutely crucial as an ally to the West. It's a crucial member of NATO. And, its underlying objectives of trying to prevent the Iranians from ever having a nuclear weapon and also curbing Iranian asymmetric warfare against the West. These are things that we should actually sign up to. The question is, how do you manage this sort of moving target of engagement with such a mercurial partner? And of course, Trump doesn't like it if you don't do what he wants immediately. Of course, if you do what he wants immediately, you may be breaking the law, and he may then move on and leave you in a very exposed position. So I think the caution that we've seen from Western leaders is fully justified. But I think where we need to do better is in communicating our position. There's a little bit of a history that you and I have discussed before of, I think, foolish British foreign policy decisions. The recognition of the Palestinian state was one of them. Yeah. The proscribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization is another. I feel that the real task for the British, the French, the Germans, and others is to be really clear that we are on America's side in principle, but then be equally clear where we simply cannot participate.
Can I ask you just as well about the Prime Minister in this country calling for Lebanon to be included in the ceasefire, at the same time Hezbollah asking Lebanon to cancel its talks with Israel? What's your reaction to that, knowing the Middle East as you do?
You see, I see that as another own goal by the Prime Minister, another poor decision. The fact of the matter is that if you treat Lebanon as part of the ceasefire, you are effectively recognizing Iranian sovereignty in Lebanon, which is an outrageous thing to do. It's not what our Gulf partners want us to do. It's not what any of our Arab allies want us to do. The Iranians have made these presumptions in Lebanon, including keeping an ambassador in Lebanon after the Lebanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs have told him he's not welcome. And so if we allow the Iranians and the Pakistanis, of course, to argue successfully that Lebanon is part of this ceasefire, we are actually making a concession that we must not make.
Yeah. Edmund, always good to talk to you. Always common sense from Edmund Fitton-Brown. Really interesting analysis there. Former ambassador to Yemen. Plenty of people getting in touch, including Becca, who says religion and politics should not mix. I was baptised as Roman Catholic, but it's all nonsense, so it really doesn't bother me. I actually found it funny. Penny in Essex says, good evening, Peter. Good evening, Penny. The Southport killings will happen again because lessons are never, ever learned. How many times have we heard the comment that lessons will be learned, and so it will continue? The parents were terrified of him and should have done something. They have blood on their hands too. I'm sure they would deny that. It should never have happened, says Penny in Essex. Penny referencing this absolutely damning report. The Southport attack would not have happened if the killer's parents, Axel Cabana's parents, had done what they morally ought to have done according to the inquiry. We'll talk about that next. We'll talk about Iran too, and we'll talk about a number of other things, including the disappearance of jam roly-poly from school dinners. These are the big issues. Talk about all of that, and do get your call in and let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He is not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch. We'll get back to your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes a little bit later on. And interestingly, from Tad, he's been in touch and says, I can't comment on the picture of President Trump that seems to be causing so much trouble because I simply don't know. But what I do know, he's the only leader with the guts to take on the nutters with nukes. And here's a prediction. In the near future, many prominent people will be vulnerable to AI manipulation, both in image and in sound. Well, Tad, I think you're right. And I think they are already. It's sometimes very, very hard to know what is true and what is not true on the internet, especially when it comes to AI, especially when it comes to videos and things like that, and things you see and people saying things as well. I've actually been taken in myself by a former colleague of mine, Dr. Hilary Jones, who is a sort of well-known TV doctor. I saw him advertising this thing, and I genuinely looked into it, and I thought, I'll be totally honest, it was weight loss pills, and I promise you, he was looking at it, and it looked as if he was saying it and recommending it. I thought, well, if Hilary says it must be fine. And then, of course, it was all AI, and I didn't realise that, and I was taken in by that. Now, I'm someone who, you know, every single thing I see online, I always say to people, including my journalism students who I'm teaching next week, I say, always be skeptical, always be critical, always have your critical thinking, always say, where's this coming from? Why is this person saying this? You know, what's this from? And I was taken in. So, I mean, these things can happen. But on that AI image, I want to go to the debate desk and ask Phil Dave, the talk presenter. Hi, Phil, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you also?
And Viggo Turling is back with us. Hi, Viggo, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great to see you as Research Director at the Adam Smith Institute. Lots to discuss on Iran, on Trump, but on this particular image. And let me just show it to you on the screen again, if I can. This is an AI image that Trump put out on his Truth Social of him. It's got an American flag in the background. He looks as if he's sort of healing a man there in a bed. Now, he says that it was basically of him as a doctor. There's some veterans there, there's a nurse and so on. He says it was him as a doctor. I mean, he's in the vestments there, the white tunic and the red kind of shawl, that with the sort of lights, you know, an orb in his hand or whatever, very much associated with Jesus Christ. I mean, there's very little ambiguity there. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I think we need to call a spade a shovel here. Phil Dave, what do you think?
Well, I think if he believes he's fooling anyone that was supposed to depict a doctor, I'm sorry, but I don't really ever recall. Occasionally I have had the need to use the American medical system. I don't ever remember seeing a doctor dressed like that, I'm sure. So if he thinks he's fooling anyone, he's not. But at the same time, he doesn't need to backtrack and say, all he needs to say is, look, do you know what, maybe that was a step too far. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. One of the reasons why I think President Trump has such a following is because he seems to be one of the few politicians in this world who is always quite honest. So if he was just honest and say...
And blunt, that bluntness is something that people quite like.
I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done this, sorry. And move on. That's all he needs to do.
But also, you can be blunt, but often he is blunt, I would argue, about other people, perhaps not about himself, and it takes...
Oh no, he's the best.
Not everyone is able to kind of...
Well, he definitely has a God complex, no doubt about it, and I think this kind of...
Is that unfair? Does he have a God complex, Viggo?
I don't think so, and I completely agree. American Governor Chris Christie has said that the Trump you see on camera is the Trump you see in private, and I think he does have a slight God complex, and I think it's remarkable that we're seeing a president of the United States increasingly use what's commonly now known as AI slop. We firstly saw it with that rather remarkable picture of the Obamas depicted as a certain kind of animal, and now we've seen that with this Jesus picture. And what I would say to Trump is that there are tens of millions of voters in the States who are Catholics, and 52% of those are Republicans, so I would be cautious of his output.
Certainly. Graham and Bushy says, can you confirm if you're actually doing your show for real or if it's an AI version of Cardi P? Says Graham. It is the correct version of me. Although I would say that, wouldn't I, if I was an AI bot? No, until I'm replaced by AI, which I'm sure is only a matter of time, I'm going to continue presenting this programme. Gaz says, I didn't know what Trump's motives were until your guest explained it. I thought it was to get Iranians to expose where their launchers were hiding, smoking them out, getting them to fire. Love your evening show, mate, says Gaz. Thank you. We'll talk more about that, but I think the key point is, of course, these talks have broken down over the weekend. I mean, 21 hours seems like a long time, but after 47 years of diplomatic deep freeze, Viggo, was it ridiculously optimistic to say this was all going to magically be solved in a reasonably short period of time with JD Vance at the helm?
Yeah, I think so. I think the length of negotiations actually surprised many people. I think the fact that they almost went on for 24 hours made people slightly hopeful that there would be some sort of positive outcome. But look, neither side wants to be the side that backs down on this question. Neither side wants to be the side that's being perceived as being weak and having lost the war. So indeed, I think it was deeply optimistic to suggest that we would have had some sort of positive outcome out of these negotiations.
And in terms of where things are now, Phil, what are your hopes, thoughts? Give me your analysis.
Look, my only hope is that America and Israel follow through and we see the fall of the Iranian regime. I'm sorry, but you can't reason with people who want to kill you. And I can't get my head around the way the number of people who don't realise this. I understand completely no one wants war. I don't want war. I know plenty of people who live in Israel. They don't want war. But I'm afraid when you've got an absolute lunatic regime who is out to kill all Jews in the world and then to go after America and then the UK and then probably the rest of the West, you can't reason with people like that. So actually, even the 21-hour talks is probably only because Iran is now so weakened.
So how is this war going to end, Phil? I mean, surely there's got to be some sort of negotiation to end the war, or is it just a complete defeat? I mean, that's unrealistic, is it not?
I don't think it's as unrealistic as people think. The truth is that, I tell you how I know how weak Iran is at the moment, is because that I have the Homefront Command app that informs people who live in Israel when an air raid siren goes off. So years ago, obviously with World War II, obviously it would have been about air raid sirens. They still do have air raid sirens there, but it's now much more modern technology that alerts everyone's phone to say you must run for shelter now. And I have that application for no other reason than I want to keep tabs on what was going on over there. And it was going off sometimes 5-6 times a day towards the start of this. It hasn't gone off for quite a while now, and the times it does go off is because of Hezbollah, nothing to do with Iran. So actually, it goes to show how weak Iran is because they've lost the ability to keep firing munitions at Israel in quite the same way they did. So they are losing. No doubt about it, they are losing.
What do you make of Starmer's role in this, Figo? Because today he was talking in Parliament about how he doesn't want the UK to be involved in enforcing the US military blockade. He's talked about his attempts to get other international partners like Macron and others to have an effort to keep the strait open, not shut, as he says. Is any of this actually aiming, and he may well have noble aims, maybe you don't think he does, maybe you think he does, but does it make any difference what Starmer does?
I don't think the Israelis or the Americans care much for, you know, the strong-worded statements of the European leaders, whether it's Macron or Starmer, particularly Starmer now that his credit with the President of the United States has decreased significantly. I think there's a lot of confusion around the subject. Trump saying that we are sending demining ships into the Strait, Starmer saying that we're not. I think whatever happens, we have to have clarity on what the British strategy actually is, because I think neither the Americans nor we know how we're actually going to help contribute to reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Thank you. We'll talk a bit more in a second about the Southport airport inquiry. Brian's been in touch, and Brian, I'm afraid I disagree with you here. Brian says, good evening, Peter. Good evening, Brian. Regarding the Southport inquiry, as a show of respect for the victims at the hands of this murderer, his name should not be spoken. I don't accord with that thinking. I know a lot of people do. I know some of my fellow presenters don't speak the name of mass murderers, for example. I think, to be clear, to talk about the facts of these things, we do need to talk about the murderer's name, and I will be mentioning it. It's not because I do have anything other than total and utter contempt for him, and I will of course mention the victims' names as well, but I do think that we do need to keep the facts, and I don't think we should shy away from that. So Brian, I respectfully disagree with you, but of course on my programmes we disagree without being disagreeable, and I hope Brian doesn't take that the wrong way other than simply a disagreement on that. We will talk about Southport because the attack would not have happened if the killer's parents had done what they ought to have morally done, the inquiry has found. I'll find out what Phil, Dave and Vigo Turling think in just a second, and let me know what you think too. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots to discuss, and a little bit later on in the programme, and indeed with Phil and Vigo on the debate desk, we'll be talking about school dinners changing, and the fact that desserts all now have to be 50% fruit. There's so many of the classic sausage rolls, toad in the hole, all those kind of things. Semolina, I think, is probably going to go. Will you lament that? Or maybe you hated school dinners. Maybe you thought they were dreadful. Whatever your thoughts are, 0344 499 1000. Dawn in Chancellor says, hi Peter, the loss of jam roly-poly is serious. What next? Spotted dick and toad in the hole? Our culture is under threat, says Dawn. I think it'll be lesser spotted dick, given what the government is saying on this. We'll talk about that all a little bit later on. We'll talk about the Boris wave and how it's going to cost every family £20,000. That's a new report out by Reform UK. But I want to talk just at this moment about the Southport attack and whether it would have happened if the killer's parents had done what they morally ought to have done. That's according to this inquiry that's looking into this. It wouldn't have happened if Axel Radicobana's parents had done what they morally ought to have done. He was 17 years old when he murdered 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift themed dance class on the 29th of January 2024. I remember being on air that day, and oh my goodness, it was grim. He attempted to murder 10 others. Horrendous for those families, and we covered that. And just, I think it was interesting actually, because even from, I mean, the sheer horror was unfolding, but even from slightly, if you'll indulge me on a broadcasting point of view, the day it happened, people were just in shock. The day after, the programme I presented the next day, that was the day when the anger came, because people were able to articulate their anger. And there's still a lot of anger about this. He was jailed for 52 years in January last year for the murders of B.B. King, who was 6, Elsie Stancombe, who was 7, and Alice de Silva Aguiar, who was 9. He avoided a whole life sentence because he was 9 days too young. It was just before his 18th birthday, but 52 years, and I'd be very surprised if he does get out. We will see. This inquiry into the incident heard the teenager's parents knew their son was hoarding knives, was accessing chilling violent content online, and had been making poison in his room. The report was published today. Sir Adrian Filford, the inquiry chairman, described the complete abandonment of responsibility by the killer's mother and father as he put it, utterly unconscionable. Now, the Prime Minister has been talking about this today in the House of Commons. This is what he said.
I want to put on record in this House my total determination to make the changes across the entire state that are so clearly necessary to honour the victims, the injured, and the families of Southport. Yeah. Today's report, Mr. Speaker, is harrowing. It is difficult to read, and I cannot begin to imagine the pain upon pain that it will cause the families that it affects. And our thoughts are with them today.
Keir Starmer in the House of Commons reacting to that report on the Southport murders. Phil, is this just another matter of lessons must be learned?
Oh, you just hear it in his voice, such empty words. I just think...
They weren't empty words from Sir Adrian Filford. They were pretty damning words about the parents.
No, I don't mean that. Sorry, I mean from Keir Starmer.
I know you do, but I'm saying that Keir Starmer might not be damning, but I'm saying the inquiry chairman is.
Oh, no, for sure. Sorry, I don't mean that at all. No, I mean, sorry, that Starmer there, just reacting to his clip. In terms of this report, though, I have a slight problem with it, and I don't know whether or not sort of I'm being unreasonable thinking like this, but you see, when you blame parents for the actions of their children, I still say that at the end of the day, a child, even if they're 17, 15, whatever it is, has still got their own mind. And even if the parents did know that all of this weaponry was being harboured and stuff like that, I still challenge anyone to say that they would easily report their child.
Well, it's your moral duty to do so. I don't care if it's your child. They should have gone to the police. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely no doubt in my mind they should have done, but it's very easy for us to sit here and say that they should have done that.
It's not easy. It's just the right thing.
It's exactly the right thing.
I know people don't want to dob their kids in,
and
but
therein lies the problem.
Yes, but they should. Vigo, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter. I think I understand what you're saying, Phil, that it's obviously difficult for a parent to go and report their child in such a manner as we're suggesting they should have. But there are clear failures here from the parents' perspective. Parents are accountable for their children. They're accountable for nurturing their child, creating an environment for them to grow up in. And what the report found was that these parents moved from Rwanda in the early 2000s, and the mother in particular had long-standing trauma with knives, completely understandably, but that led to her failing to address the presence of knives in their household early on. So I agree with you, Peter. I think parents have a moral accountability to care for their children, and in this circumstance they absolutely failed to spot those issues.
And they could have cared for him. I mean, maybe it is easy to sit here in moral judgment of these people, but I mean, we've had an inquiry, and Sir Adrian Fulford, it's his job to sit in moral judgment of these people, and that is what he has done. He's also talked about the taxi driver who transported Axel Ruddy-Cabana to this Taylor Swift-themed concert for creating significant obstructions to constructive engagement with the agencies involved. He said the couple were too willing to defend their son. I mean, it is just awful what happened. It is unspeakably awful what happened. That family, and indeed the community still in Southport, still reacting to this. Two of the recommendations addressing problems said the family, talking about the family, said the Youth Justice Board should produce clear practical guidance for parents of children who've been found with a knife or other offensive weapon, including the importance of informing agencies. I mean, do we need clear and practical guidance on that? Surely, I am sure there are lots of very, very good people watching and listening to this programme right now. If their son or daughter had a knife, they would immediately say, get that out of the house right now, or I will report you to the police. I mean, that is what I know the good people who watch and listen to the station would do.
If there is a smidgen of hope that someone has that level of decency within them, yes, but then the other part of me thinks, as much as I don't blame parents for not wanting to dob their children into the police, what I would say, to counter what I've said, is that I wouldn't have a problem personally if there is, as this report has found, there is complacency within the household based on the actions of the child and not doing anything about it. I'd say they're complicit in the crime, and therefore the parents should be tried and punished as well.
So, am I being unreasonable here? Am I being too harsh on the parents? What I'm saying unfair? Let me know your thoughts. Maybe you're a parent or grandparent, maybe you're somebody who just has an opinion on this, and maybe you don't, like me, you don't have children. 0344 499 1000. Just to, I do want a little bit more of the thoughts of Viggo and Phil on this. Just one more question, but perhaps I can get them to react to what the chairman of the Southport inquiry, Sir Adrian Fulford, has actually said on this. Let's hear this.
First, the attack on the 29th of July would not have occurred if AR's parents had reported to the authorities the full extent of what they knew in late July, including on the day of the attack. Second, if the relevant agencies, individually and collectively, had properly managed and responded to the known danger that he posed to others from December 2019 onwards, it is highly likely that this event would not have occurred.
What do you make of that, Viggo?
Look, I sympathise with both arguments. I sympathise with Phil's point that it's difficult for parents to report their own children, and I sympathise with the inquiry's findings that obviously there was a failure on the parents' parts. But I also think we shouldn't forget the fact that in this circumstance, the prevent scheme failed as well.
It didn't prevent.
It did, indeed. It didn't prevent. Obviously, I think this is a unique, anomalous scenario, but we read in the inquiry that they failed to account for his autism diagnosis, for example, and how that might affect his actions, obviously his aggressive actions. So yes, parents on one side, but also there are questions about the prevent scheme as well.
I also struggle a little bit, though, when it comes to bringing mental health into play here as a reason or a justification for something.
It's maybe not a justification, but it is a factor.
Factor, maybe, but I know plenty of people who do have various mental health conditions and they wouldn't even contemplate carrying out what has been carried out here.
Yeah, but indeed, but I think, Phil, we have to assess the contextual circumstances of this. Obviously, there are many people with autism.
And that's the point of an inquiry.
Indeed. Yes, there are many people with autism who wouldn't go and do what this man did. However, it's within the context of his upbringing, his parents, and that's why we're talking about the actions of his parents and how they led to this.
Ironically, the parents could have actually cared for their son properly if they'd reported him. It's what David Cameron said about stop and search back in the day, again about knives. He said the best thing you can say to someone carrying a knife is turn out your pockets, show me what you've got, and if they have a knife, tell them and deal with them that way. That is the most caring, reasonable thing you can do for that person, rather than let them accumulate lives as these people did. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Angie, who says, I disagree with Phil Dave. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. If I knew or even suspected one was up to no good, I'd absolutely report them. As much as we love our children, we have to protect everyone. Brian's been back in touch actually and says, good evening, Peter. I love being in a democratic country where we can debate and disagree. Respect to you, Peter. He also says that the killer of Charlie Kirk was handed in by his father. Brian, I'd forgotten about that, and thank you for that reminder. That is a very, very good point of the fact that parents can do this and can show the moral leadership that is needed in these dreadful, dreadful circumstances. Lots to report in a second, and debate with Phil and Vigo back in the debate desk. The Boris wave costing every family £20,000. That is a Reform UK report. We also have migrants deceiving the Home Office to claim asylum. We'll talk about deep-fried meals such as fish and chips to be banned from school menus, and a landlord who painted a giant St George's Cross on the outside of his pub could be forced to remove it. Guess how many complaints there have been? One complaint. Lots to discuss on the debate desk. Stay with us and let me know your thoughts too. Keep your voices and your thoughts coming in. 0344 499 1000.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He is not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Tonya has been in touch with a very good point on WhatsApp, and one of the things I love about this job is how there's great wisdom out there. There's loads of people who send me really, really interesting thoughts and things that I haven't considered. And Tonya, this is brilliant. What do you think would have happened if Axel Radekovana's parents had reported him to the police? There's no prison time for carrying an offensive weapon anymore. I bet he'd have got a caution at much. He wouldn't have cared. And the question, I suppose, Tonya doesn't pose this question, but the question is, would it actually have stopped him? So that's a very good point. We'll leave this just for now, but we will return to it a bit later on in the programme. If you have any thoughts on it, do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. I want to talk about the Boris wave, a report from Reform UK saying this will cost every family £20,000. Now, the report is by Amar Johal. I don't know if you remember Amar Johal. He doesn't come on anymore because he can't, because he's involved with Reform UK, but he's a really, really smart lawyer. He now works for Reform UK as their Director of Policy, and he has put this report together Phil, what do you make of it?
Well, in a nutshell, I think anything that... and it's obviously very important for people to realise that when they say it would cost every household £20,000, it doesn't necessarily mean every household will have to cough up 20k right there and then, as many people couldn't do that. But in terms of over a period of time, and certainly out of the taxpayers' money, for sure, yes, that's an awful lot of money that could be saved. What I make of it is what a lot of us have been saying, certainly on Talk, for a very long time, and that is that immigration, when uncontrolled, costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of money to people who don't deserve it to cost a lot of money. So when we see the ever-increasing rise of bills all over the place and different taxes coming into play just to try and plug the miraculous £20 billion black holes here and there that Labour find, then I'm not in the least bit surprised that it causes division in this country, and people understandably get very fed up with mass migration.
Just before I go to Vigo, I just want to play a clip from Zia Youssef on the Boris wave. He is, of course, the very, very senior person, would be the Home Secretary if he was elected and if Reform UK became the government of this country. Let's hear from Zia Youssef on his thoughts on what he calls the Boris wave.
The Boris wave of unprecedented mass immigration permanently altered the culture of this country. It's permanently altered the fiscal trajectory of the country. It permanently altered the lives of British people against their wishes. The Tory party, having promised in 4 consecutive manifestos to cut immigration significantly, instead unleashed the most extraordinary surge in mass immigration this country has ever seen.
Now, certainly, I was speaking to someone involved at that time in the Conservative government and said the Boris wave was less the Boris wave and more the Sunak surge, disassociating himself from it. But either way, you have a lot more people in this country, 1.6 million people who moved to the UK under Boris Johnson and his successors between 2021 and 2024, set to be given indefinite leave to remain. And if you tot that all up, NHS care, benefits, new infrastructure to cope with the increased population, you're talking about £622 billion, more than £500 billion by 2085. And that is a £20,000 liability for every household in the UK. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's important this article came out. I think, like Phil said, it's a hidden cost. Many people associate the cost of immigration with the asylum hotels, etc., etc. But the real cost is the burden on our public infrastructure that the Boris wave or the rapid unprecedented rise in immigration that we've seen over the previous years will cause to our NHS, to our public transportation, etc. So, I think these findings are really important in getting people to realise that we need to sort of crack down on this problem.
How do you crack down on the problem, Vigo?
Yeah, there are, so the Scandinavian countries, for example, the progressive Scandinavian countries, they've implemented some really harsh rules. For example, in Sweden, all non-EU...
Declare your interest.
Yeah, I'm Swedish. All non-EU, but hence I know, all non-EU citizens in Sweden from the 1st of January 2027 will not have access to many social benefits. Shabana Mahmood is trying a similar thing, but we'll see. When Labour try to cut the welfare bill, they usually get a bit of a rebellion that follows. So we'll see if she manages, but it is possible.
But of course the difference is that of all the parties to do it, Labour are the one who should be cutting the welfare bill, because actually they're the party who would probably be questioned the least if they did it. All the other parties would tolerate one heck of a backlash. You know, we've seen from years gone by, whenever Conservative Party have tried to make cuts, oh, it's those nasty Tories, look how evil they are, they're disgusting. I agree completely. You know, this report, I hope, is a very useful piece of evidence to suggest that actually all of those who have for many years now been rightly expressing deep concern about immigration are not doing it because they're diehard racists. It's because they are gravely worried about the cost implication to them and their families. And at the end of the day, why the hell should the British public foot the bill for people who come over here and some, not all, just want an easy ride? It is not okay.
Speaking of an easy ride, the bidoun in Arabic means without nationality, without citizenship. It's used to describe stateless Arabs, particularly in Kuwait, and mainly descended from nomadic tribes who were not granted citizenship after the country's independence in 1961. A scam which has been revealed by the Telegraph newspaper, obtaining a 25-page document written in Arabic, providing a script for those applying to the Home Office for refugee status as a Badoon, even though they're not from the community. What do you make of this, Vigo?
I think it's emblematic of a welfare system that is just simply too exploitable. And I think that, you know, we need to address this, but I would also say that it's not just an issue with migrants. We've seen a trend on social media platforms of benefit influencers, as they're called. So what I'd say, across the board, we're seeing exploitation of the welfare system, and that just goes to show we need to crack down on how easy it is to get access to these benefits. A 3-child family in Tower Hamlets across a multiple benefit platform can accrue £82,000 a year. It's just simply too easy.
And when you think of how much money would be needed pre-tax by someone to accrue that level of income of 82, you're into what, over 100,000, easily 120, 130,000. It is crazy. Phil, final thought on this?
Yeah, I'm afraid these disgusting people have no scruples. They are prepared to fleece the great British public and take gross advantage of our extraordinarily generous nature. I think it is a shame on them, and I think it is a total shame on the government for not only not really doing much about this, but actually making the benefit system even easier for some people. It's disgusting. Hard-working, tax-paying citizens don't want to foot the bill for people who fleece us. Get a grip.
It's interesting, 76% of people who claim to be asylum seekers are granted asylum, so a quarter of them are not granted asylum, although there's many questions about whether those people actually properly leave our country in the numbers that they should, and they're here, they are literally here illegally and should not continue to be here for a second longer. Of those 76% who are granted asylum, my question is, how many of them are running these scams? How much is the system, as Vigo and Phil have correctly pointed out, how much of it is actually open to abuse by people who know how to deal with this?
Can I just put the final line on that and say that I believe personally the true test of how you know if someone genuinely, legitimately wants to come to this country and actually be a contributing citizen of this country is ban every single person who has never paid a single penny in tax from claiming any sort of benefit for at least 5 years. Then you'll know who genuinely wants to be.
What about 6-year-old children who haven't put anything into the tax system? Phil, would you say, sorry, your broken nose can go elsewhere?
Then they've got a long wait ahead of them.
Heartless Phil Dave on the debate desk.
I don't want to pay for them.
You don't want to pay for 6-year-olds?
Nope.
Really?
No.
What about children born in this country who get medical care?
They're born in this country, it's different.
Okay, but they haven't paid into the tax system.
But they're British citizens. I don't want to pay.
There's no guarantee they will pay into the tax system, though.
No guarantee at all, but I still say I don't want to pay for it. And apart from anything, sorry, parents shouldn't have children if they can't afford them.
But the NHS is free to the... Sorry, this is mad argument. Anyway, we'll talk some other time about that. Phil Davis with me, as is Vigo Turling. Vigo is a research associate at the Adam Smith Institute. Let's talk a little bit about the flag row. This is an absurd flag row. A landlord who painted a giant St George's cross on the outside of his pub could be forced to remove it after just one complaint was made. Vigo Youth, give us the detail of this.
Look, this is ridiculous. I really feel for Jerry. The Adam Smith Institute, we released the other week a free speech bill, and I think this is testament to why we need one. We shouldn't be forcing people to remove flags when they're painted.
What is the argument to remove the flag?
Well,
what's the point?
Apparently it's racist, which I don't understand.
The English flag?
Yeah, and look, I can come at this from an unbiased point of view.
Being Swedish,
look, I think it's ludicrous to paint the English flag as something racist. I think, you know, if there's anything we should adopt from the Americans, and I'll be careful here, but if there's anything we should adopt from the Americans, it's how sacred their flag is. Because when you criticise the flag in the United States, you're not going to do that well. So both Union Jack...
Tell me about the Swedish flag, right? If you were... How proud are the Swedes of their flag?
We raised, despite being a relatively unpatriotic country in comparison to the United Kingdom, we don't, and obviously the UK is less patriotic in comparison to the US, but we raise our flag much more often than you would see in Britain, and we wave the flag, etc., etc. I think this whole debate is just a distraction. Let's just see the flags for what they are, as sources of national pride. Let's stop calling them racist.
But if you had someone in Sweden who flew a flag or painted their pub with the Swedish flag, maybe that wouldn't happen, I don't know, would anybody raise an eyebrow? Would this be a story?
No. Not in a second.
Yeah. Phil?
It is so unbelievably pathetic. Can we just stop and think about what we're talking about here? We're talking about a British pub or an English pub, painting the English flag on the side of that pub. It is a non-story. The fact that one person has complained, I say if you don't like the English flag, don't live in England is the obvious answer. Seriously, it makes me sick. How dare anyone be that disrespectful to a country they're lucky enough, and I don't care where they come from, how dare they be that disrespectful to a country they're lucky enough to call home?
The complaint is reported to have stated the 17th century pub looked like the headquarters of the National Front. And because the pub is a Grade 2 listed building, Jerry has had to apply for planning permission in order to keep the 20-foot by 20-foot Red Cross, but several people have rejected the application, including one who said it was racist and sent out an anti-immigrant message. Those people need to get a life.
I will say one thing though, the Grade 2 status is slightly different in the argument. That is slightly different, but even so.
There's something of it. Someone has written, Phil Dave for PM. Have you been texting in again, Phil? Let's talk about deep-fried meals such as fish and chips to be banned from school menus under a government junk food clampdown. Did you have school dinners, Vigo?
I had fish and chips for lunch every Friday at school.
Good. And was it good? Were you happy with your...
Yeah, reasonably. Yeah, it got a bit tiring after a few years, but you know what I would say on this is fish and chips in school is obviously a massive tradition on a Friday. Is a huge tradition in this country. What I would also say is I am sort of slightly sympathetic to the argument that we do have a childhood obesity crisis.
Yes.
1 in 3 kids aged 2 to 15 are either overweight or obese, and that has a massive impact on the NHS, about £6.5 billion a year.
So is this a good idea, Phil, to take the junk food out, take the heavily sugary desserts, like jam roly-poly that we remember from days gone by?
Look, I don't want to sit on the fence, but I am slightly in two minds because I worry what the motivation is. If the motivation is genuinely because you're trying to make children healthier, I'm all for it. If the motivation is a systematic dismantling of various traditions that have held this country in very good stead for many decades, then I'm not in favour of it. Do it for the right reasons, then I'm on board.
That's what the government says it's doing it for the right reasons. It wants to disappear pastries, pizzas, sausage rolls, snacks will be tightly limited, sweet puddings will be reined in, desserts have to contain at least 50% fruit under the new rules, fruit, veg and whole grains prioritised as fresh up meals. Quickly, what will you miss? Will you miss the fish and chips? What would you miss from school dinner? Did you have school dinners, Phil?
I did, sadly, yeah. What would I miss? I'd miss being able to bring in my own sandwich.
What would you miss? What dessert would you miss?
Well, I think if I was in school now, maybe not a dessert, I'd miss the pizza.
Miss the pizza, yeah. You know, actually, you mentioned that Friday tradition. They actually have that. It's not just in the UK, it's also in other countries as well. You know the atomic lab CERN in Switzerland? They always have that on a Friday, where they have fish and chips.
For goodness sake.
Debbie's been in touch and says, I like the idea of school dinners being crappy. Maybe then parents will stop claiming free school meals. The kids don't need to give them a packed lunch. If you ain't that broke, your kid will eat anything. Well, what do you miss? What do you want to retain? Is it jam roly-poly? Is it toad in the hole?
Is it
whatever
decent
it is,
humour?
let us know. 0344 499 1000. Thanks to Vigo and Phil on the debate desk. More in just a moment here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's just gone 8 o'clock. Thank you so much for your company on the Evening Exchange. I'm Peter Cardwell. So much to talk about between now and 10. We'll get a top Labour analyst in a minute on Starmer, what he's saying about Iran and the Middle East. Also, Rayner, Burnham, all those machinations behind the scenes as we look forward to less than a month, those local elections. What's going to happen? We'll talk this hour as well about the Boris wave. Kevin Foster, the former Minister for Future Borders and Immigration under Boris Johnson, will say what happened and what he thinks of all of that. We'll talk about a potential EU betrayal, EU rules to be imposed on Britain under Labour's plans. We'll talk about another EU sellout. We'll also talk about anti-Semitism at universities. This is a big, big topic. So many of our young people are being brainwashed into pro-Palestinian views, are making excuses for Hamas, and are making excuses for those who would attack people simply because of their Judaism or their Zionism. It is outrageous. I'm going to talk to a student at a major London university about what happened to him. We'll talk more about lots of other things as well, about migration, as I say, about deep-fried food as well. The government is phasing out jam, roly-poly, toad in the hole, all these loved desserts and different meals that people were have in schools. What will you miss, or what will you not miss, actually? Because Michael's been in touch from Suffolk and says, I'm 53. I truly don't think we had fish and chips at my school. I'm ashamed I'm sad to say I missed out. I must say the school dinners at my school were pretty good actually. My dad was a school head teacher actually, and I remember being sick one day. He had to go over to his school to he had to look after me, and his head of the canteen, my goodness, she made me an absolutely beautiful bowl of soup, and that was probably the best school dinner I ever had. Lots to discuss on all of this. I want your thoughts on every issue we're talking about today. We'll go to the phone soon. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, less than a minute, please. We'll play those out before 10. Main number for that, main number for calls, also the main number for WhatsApp text messages. It is, of course, 0344 499 1000. So many things to discuss before 10. Get in touch. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you to Nat in Tel Aviv, who's been in touch and says, evening, Peter. Evening, Nat. Great to hear you're listening in Tel Aviv there. It's not just that easy for us here in Israel. Of course, we want Trump to help finish the job, but he just doesn't seem to know, to use his own words, what the F he's doing. And we're beginning to lose the will here. My daughter was lucky enough to give birth in your normal delivery room during the shaky ceasefire, but thought she'd ask the nurse what the plan was for a possible Hezbollah attack. The nurse's response, we stay here and pray. Is that any way to live? Well, Nat, a very big congratulations on the arrival of your grandson. That is a wonderful event in your life, and let's hope that he lives in a much, much more peaceful Middle East. There's so much going on this topic today. There's so many things that have happened over the weekend. The failure of those talks after 21 hours, J.D. Vance getting back on Air Force 2, heading back to America, and of course Starmer's reaction here in the UK. Parliament is back after the Easter recess. The Prime Minister was in the House of Commons. This is what he said.
The Strait of Hormuz, shamefully exploited by Iran. All of the leaders that I met were crystal clear that freedom of navigation is vital and must be restored. No conditions, no tolls, and no tolerance of Iran holding the world's economy to ransom. Because, Mr. Speaker, the impact of Iran's behaviour in the Strait is causing untold economic damage. It's visible on every petrol forecourt in the country. My guide from the start of this conflict has always been our national interest. That's why we stayed out of the war and why we continue to stay out of the war. And that is why we are working now to restore freedom of navigation in the Middle East, because that is squarely in our national interest.
Keir Starmer speaking in the House of Commons a little bit earlier today. Lots going on with Labour. The Prime Minister saying the UK will not join Trump's blockade of Iran's ports. We'll also talk a little bit about Starmer, Rayner and Burnham and the machinations and different thoughts on all of that and where Starmer goes from here. Let's speak to John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent. John, great to talk to you. How are you doing?
Hello, Peter. I was very struck by Keir Starmer's hair. I think it's gone white over Easter.
Okay. At least he doesn't think he's Jesus.
At least he doesn't think he's Jesus.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. Although we are talking about the Holy Trinity of Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner and Andy Burnham. Just on the events of the weekend, obviously we've seen JD Vance heading back to America, those talks falling down. Starmer, is he actually doing anything of note, of worthiness? Because he was certainly doing the shuttle diplomacy in Saudi Arabia and Qatar late last week. Did it amount to a hill of beans?
I don't know that it did, but I mean, I think I think he was trying to do the right thing, and I can't see what else he could have done. I think it is sensible to talk to all the people in the region, but I mean, the power in this conflict is held by Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And he didn't. Well, to be fair to him, he did talk to Donald Trump on the telephone. I don't know that they had a very substantive conversation, but he doesn't seem to be talking to Netanyahu. And I don't think Britain has a huge amount of leverage in this situation.
Trump himself has talked about the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Let's hear a little bit about what he has been saying. Let's hear from the American president talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. Their whole Navy is underwater. You know that. 158 ships are gone. Their Navy's gone. Most of their mine droppers are gone. We have a lot of people, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil, and that will be very effective. But what we want to do is we want to, and again, we don't need this. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait.
Donald Trump speaking last night. How does Starmer fit into this? What does Britain do you think, John? How do we react to this?
Well, how can you react to the increasingly sort of disordered ravings of a very elderly president? I mean, Donald Trump has always been outrageous and infuriating and difficult to deal with, but I think he's entering the sort of Biden phase of becoming incoherent.
I mean, neither of us is a medical professional, John, but I am definitely. I think there is greater evidence that Trump has got even wilder in some of his claims. I mean, we can just look at this Jesus image now, if we get that on the screen, of him. And he's claimed, of course, that he wasn't saying that he was Jesus. He claimed that he was a doctor and that was AI. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just not credible.
No, it's not. And I mean, he has deleted it now, which means, someone at least has intervened to say, look, this is going too far. But I mean, the problem is that he is more or less unrestrained. Nobody seems to be able to tell him to just stop talking. Yes, he is increasingly, it seems, losing touch with reality. I mean, he does not seem to have understood that by closing off a fifth of the world's oil supply, that is going to damage American consumers, because they are going to have to pay higher.
And us here in the UK, as well. We'll talk more about that in a second. But let's just play this clip of Donald Trump saying the Jesus image was actually meant to be him as a doctor. He's standing beside a woman who delivered him a McDonald's to the Oval Office because he's implemented a law now, signed into a law which means that people who deliver food get to keep 100% of their tips. This was something that he was illustrating, but he was asked about the Jesus image, and this is what he said.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus surprised?
Well, it wasn't a picture. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and it had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example, the 11,000, I understand your husband's going through treatment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's going through some very serious cancer treatment, so
yes, sir.
This goes a long way.
Yes, sir, it sure does.
Well, the woman who was delivering the McDonald's, whose husband is very sadly having cancer care, in praise of that, he said, I do make people better, I make people a lot better. I think we'll probably just leave it there on that, but I'd be very, very interested to hear what people have to say about this. 0344 499 1000. John, to get back to Starmer, a slightly Oaks meeting there, three potential rivals. Some may call them Labour's Holy Trinity, says the Telegraph. We're doing the best to put on a show of unity at a school called Holy Trinity in Greater Manchester. They were there to talk about what else? Breakfast clubs on the day the government announced plans to ban fried foods from school canteens. Angela Rayner was there, as was Andy Burnham. I mean, pretty Oaks.
Well, he seemed to carry it off reasonably well. I mean, they're all trained politicians. It was in Angela Rayner's constituency, but Andy Burnham was there.
As the mayor of Greater Manchester.
Well, indeed, yeah, because it's in his patch. But I mean, he's the guy who's recently been telling people that he was assured by somebody very senior in the Labour Party that he wasn't going to be blocked as a candidate in the Manchester Gorton by-election. And he seems to have believed them. So what he is in effect saying is, I'm too naive to be Prime Minister. And Angela Rayner, who could actually be a challenger to Keir Starmer for the leadership, doesn't seem to have enough support among Labour MPs to kick off a leadership election.
I'm astonished that Andy Burnham would not suspect someone in any political party to be completely double-crossing and a liar. Interesting with Angela Rayner as well. You just don't think she has the numbers?
Well, I think if she had the numbers, she would have deployed them by now.
Well, why not wait until after the local elections when Labour is forecast to do very, very badly? I spoke to one analyst, pollster actually, recently. No, sorry, not a pollster, the political editor of the Times, Steve Swinford, who was saying that they may lose, okay, it's a big election, lots and lots and lots of councillors up for election and re-election, but Labour could lose 2,000 councillors.
Yeah. Absolutely, they could. And I think what's going to be even more damaging is that they could actually come fifth in share of the vote. I mean, it's going to be a real race to the bottom against the Tories as to whether Labour or Tories are going to get to fewer votes.
So what do they do and how do they pivot? Because we had that big poll in the Sunday Times yesterday as well, putting Reform UK at 28%. It hadn't been at such a high percentage in a number of polls for a while, hovering around 23, 24%. And actually, look, there isn't an election tomorrow, but if there were an election tomorrow and those numbers were replicated, you'd have Rachel Reeves, Wes Streeting, Darren Jones, all these cabinet big beasts who would lose their seats to Reform or a few of them, people like Hilary Benn, the Northern Ireland Secretary, to the Greens.
Yeah, no, well, what was interesting about that, the way that poll was reported, I thought, was that the headline was that cabinet ministers would lose their seats to the Greens. But actually, as you rightly point out, Peter, more cabinet ministers would lose seats to Reform. I mean, Reform is still the real threat to Labour. And I think what's going to happen on the 8th of May is going to be a lot of people taking their heads off and running around in little circles like headless chickens. And they will, there'll be people in the Labour Party saying we've got to shift to the left. We've got to try and copy some of the Green policies that are obviously proving so attractive.
Bigger breasts, bad teeth, legalising all drugs.
No, wealth. It'll be stuff like a wealth tax and imaginary economics about borrowing money. It doesn't matter. All that kind of thing. I think would be a disaster for Labour if they pursue that line. I mean, I'm afraid people don't like Keir Starmer, and I know he's boring, but I think Labour just have to stick with him for the time being, and have to stick with responsible policies, however much it's hurting the electorate.
John, very interesting to talk to you. I think we could have another 20-minute discussion about whether those policies have actually been responsible or not, but we'll leave it right there. John, thank you. John Parental there, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent. Lots of people getting in touch, including Dawn, who says, a serious point. After having worked in social housing, I met hundreds of families. Many households have zero control of their children. I've seen many things that would surprise most people, so legislation would be useless. Liz says, ban the fish and chips, but bring on the halal meat, another nail in our cultural coffin. Ray says, Peter, for my detective training, we use the ABC method. Accept nothing, believe no one, check everything. I watched 2 videos on YouTube yesterday about what was found in the remains of the MH370, the missing plane. Both were totally false. And that's a really interesting point, Ray. And the only thing, the interesting thing is that when it comes to broadcasting, when it comes to putting things online, YouTube, social media, whatever, we're quite a big company. We're not the BBC, but we're quite a big company, and we have, good ways to distribute what I say, whether it's the radio, whether it's TV, whether it's YouTube, whether it's clips, whatever it is. We have a whole team behind the scenes, engineers and producers, that make sure what I say can be seen and heard by many, many, many people. But apart from that technology and apart from that distribution, the only real difference I have from someone with, an iPhone in their kitchen is trust. And if you don't trust me and you don't trust the station, lots of people don't trust the BBC, lots of people don't trust, Channel 4 News or whatever. Well, that's the big thing. And the thing is, you've got to be able to trust people. And I make mistakes, and I try to fess up to my mistakes. If I get a detail wrong, it's a 3-hour show, I'm probably not going to get every single detail right. I'll try my best at all times. But trust is absolutely fundamental to our media, to our society, and the breakdown of that trust when it comes to Parliament, when it comes to the police, when it comes to HMRC, loads of different institutions, well, that's a major, major issue, and that's really at the heart. Fairness and trust, I would say, are the 2 things that are at the heart of almost every story I do. So, Ray, you've hit the nail on the head there. Another person says, Zen Yogi Zen, Jeffrey, says if the Pope wants to pontificate, see what you did there, about geopolitics, then he has to rule with the punches. This is after the President of the United States said that he was weak, said the Pope Leo XIV was weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. So that was a sort of interesting one there as well. We'll talk in just a second to Kevin Foster. He was the former Minister for Future Borders and Immigration during the Boris wave. We'll talk about that and the Reform UK report into all of that. Kevin, in fairness to him, and fair dues, Kevin, coming on to talk about this big report. We'll talk to him in just a second. We'll get your views on it in a minute too. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He is not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Adam on Twitter, who says Donald Trump is not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. Yep, that was probably inevitable. Thank you for that. Keep your calls, text, tweets and voice notes coming in. We'll take a couple of calls in a minute, but I want to speak to Kevin Foster first. He is a former Minister for Future Borders and Immigration. He was in the Home Office between 2019 and 2022. And in fairness, fair dues, Kevin, for going on this one. You could have easily said no. This is Nigel Farage. He says he wants to force Boris Johnson to testify under oath in a national inquiry into Britain's migrant crisis if he wins the next election. He would order the probe amid fears the 1.6 million foreign nationals settled in the UK between 2026 and 2030 will destroy the country's finances. He says he wants the whole truth, the full truth and nothing but the truth. Boris himself will be forced to testify under penalty of perjury. This is after a report by Reform UK which says the Boris wave will cost every family £20,000. So Kevin, are you going to tell us the truth under oath, and can I have my 20,000 back, please?
Well, I'll certainly be interested to see who would end up at this inquiry if Reform were in government, because the actual peak of net migration was under Suella Braverman as Home Secretary and Mr Sunak as Prime Minister and Robert Jenrick as Immigration Minister. So it's quite interesting to hear some of the rhetoric today. Just contrast it to those particular facts from people who, by the way, two of them stood as Conservative candidates at the last general election when they'd been aware of what the net migration figures were.
On the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp for the Conservatives said this is a piece of cheap party political theatrics that would cost taxpayers millions to mask Reform's lack of actual policies or solutions. If we look at the actual numbers, Kevin, 1.46 million migrants moved to the UK in the year to March 2023. The number of arrivals fell slightly to 1.3 million in the year to June 2014 before dropping again to 898,000 last year. Net migration, which is obviously the people leaving the UK, surged, which takes into account that, surged to a record high of 944,000 in the year ending March 2023. I mean, whether it was a Sunak surge or a Boris wave, there was certainly a lot more people in the country, and that was completely against what people wanted to happen. Why did it happen?
Well, Peter, let's take ourselves back to the middle part of 2022. There was one thing that happened that actually a lot of people were demanding the government did even more on. I remember spending days trying to fending off why we had a visa. We didn't just scrap visa requirements for Ukrainians. So there was a very large inflow to the country of those leaving Ukraine following the attack by Putin in early 2022.
It wasn't 1.5 million people.
No, but you're citing the figure, and it was it was in the hundreds of thousands that moved in. It was actually the largest peacetime movement of people outside of the wartime evacuations from our cities that we had seen in one single movement. So certainly the Ukraine and Hong Kong were a significant part of the drive. But what there had been, and actually it was me who commissioned it, in the early part of 2022, we were coming out of the pandemic, travel restrictions were starting to end, and it was time to review the rules that had been put in place. And we asked the Migration Advisory Committee to look at the rules for things like the skilled worker visa and look at ways to tighten it up. Now, that was due to be implemented in September, October's rule changes. It didn't happen. Now, Mr Sunak can perhaps give us the better explanation of why that didn't happen. But all of those changes didn't then happen. And perhaps the mistake the Conservative Party made was that many of those changes did not come in until April 2024. For example, scrapping the discount for salaries that you could pay someone coming into the country if it was on the shortage occupation list, upping the salary threshold. The salary threshold was never meant to be frozen in time, in the same way as the minimum wage was introduced 20-odd years back, but it didn't just stay at the same rate for 20 years afterwards. So there were some things that should have been done at an earlier stage alongside, but yeah, we can sit and point to Ukraine and Hong Kong as to some of what happened in 2022. But what was missing was that there was meant to be implemented restrictions tightening. Also, to add on to this, Peter, the final point I'll make is it's worth noting that historically net migration has almost certainly been fairly heavily undercounted due to free movement. Whereas when we left the EU, people then to come and work had to have a visa. In the time of free movement, you could literally just come into the country as an EU citizen and get a job. And people remember there was a campaign group called the 3 million, because that's what everyone thought was the number of people who'd come into free movement. And when we set up the USS to take applications from people protecting free movement rights, it's got about 6 million people applied to it. So many of the historical figures are almost certainly undercounted, particularly around about 2004 and perhaps 2014, when countries in the east of Europe were able to move here, particularly given the numbers we see from places like Poland and Romania.
We saw a big poll in the Sunday Times yesterday. It had Reform UK at 28 percentage points. It predicted if there was an election tomorrow, which of course there isn't, Reform UK would have almost a majority, one seat short of a majority. If there were to be a Reform UK government, if Nigel Farage were to become Prime Minister after the next election, and he set up this inquiry, would you go? Would you, would you risk perjury, or would you go and tell the truth about what happened, or would you simply just say what you've said to me in the last 3 or 4 minutes?
Well, Peter, I respect the law, and if I was required to go to it, and without going into it, there's an ongoing inquiry into something that happened actually whilst Suella Braverman was in the Home Office that I've been asked to make a statement for, and I've been only too happy to do so. That's the sort of thing you should do, is cooperate with the law. And I've done even, and actually, if you give any statement, there's potential consequences if you make false or misleading comments. So people shouldn't think it's just like if you give an oath in court. If you give a statement to any form of inquiry and you're not truthful, then that clearly has consequences and penalties.
Is it reasonable?
Yes, but I think with that poll, I would just say that as you say, we're 3 years away from an election, and plenty of those wins were pretty marginal. And we've seen some by-elections recently where what was predicted to be a Reform win turned out to be a win for someone else.
Well, we'll see what happens after the locals. We'll see what happens there. I mean, polls are only a snapshot of public opinion on any given day. Let's just hear a little bit about what Zia Youssef has said about this, and perhaps get your reaction to that. Zia Youssef, of course, would be the Home Secretary if he were elected as an MP, and if Reform UK become the government. This is what Zia Youssef has been saying about this.
The Boris wave of unprecedented mass immigration permanently altered the culture of this country. It's permanently altered the fiscal trajectory of the country. It permanently altered the lives of British people against their wishes. The Tory party, having promised in 4 consecutive manifestos to cut immigration significantly, instead unleashed the most extraordinary surge in mass immigration this country has ever seen.
What do you make of that, Kevin?
Well, certainly today's announcement is a good move by Zia Youssef in terms of rather pinning 2 of his new rivals in Reform. It won't have escaped his notice, I'm sure, that Suella and Robert Jenrick would end up having to appear before this inquiry, where, of course, Zia Youssef, whilst a member of the Conservative Party, wasn't in Parliament. So I can certainly see the tactical positioning from Zia that's going on in relation to this issue. But look, was there a need to have taken action to tighten the migration system slightly earlier? Yes, I've said that before. It's something that I'd argued for going back to, when I commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee back in 2022. That said, though, there's plenty of people who were, including some quite prominent figures in Reform, who were cheering on the idea of us doing more to welcome people from Ukraine following the attack on Ukraine by Vladimir Putin, who now seem to blame all that on Boris Johnson, which is quite an interesting position to take.
Kevin, thanks, and fair dues for you for coming on. Just on the 20 grand, I'll send you my bank details on WhatsApp. If you just send it through, cash, cheque, postal order, whatever you want, Kevin.
Send it to Suella. She was in Home Secretary at the top of the peak. I'm sure she'll be happy to send you a cheque for it.
I mean, cheques will be accepted, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin Foster, there, former Minister for Future Borders and Immigration. What do you think? Who's to blame for the Boris wave? And should we have an inquiry into it? Is that a reasonable thing to expect? And who should appear before that inquiry? 0344 499 1000. On the state of the country, Ollie's been in touch from Manchester. Ollie, I understand this is your first time giving us a ring. You're very, very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
So I would like to say that there's a lot of problems facing this country. There's NHS waiting lists are through the roof. The cost of living keeps rising under this Labour government. But migration is not to blame for this. The people who are to blame for this are the billionaires or the millionaires or the past 2 governments who've continued austerity and continue to push working class people into poverty.
Why is it the fault? Hold on a second, Ollie. Why is it the fault of the government that people have gone into poverty, do you think?
Because because we've seen constant cuts of public services.
Well, we haven't with the NHS, for example.
Yes.
Well, no, factually.
Yes, we have.
Well,
Yes,
well
we
hold
have.
on a second, Ollie.
That's incorrect. That's an incorrect point.
Ollie, with the NHS, when the Conservatives came in 2010, they had £139 billion a year for NHS England. Now it's over 200 billion. That's not a cut.
We've constantly seen we have seen cuts because we've constantly seen privatisation over the past two.
You haven't seen a cut in the NHS budget.
Yeah, we have seen privatisation. We have seen private companies brought into the NHS. That is correct. Through the companies.
Why is privatisation by itself a bad thing in your view, Ollie?
Yeah, privatisation is a bad thing because.
But why?
Because then we have private invested interests in our NHS, in our healthcare system, which I think as many people across the country will not agree with. People do not want people to be profiting off something that is a basic need. Healthcare is a basic need of people all across the country. I know people who are living in pain, actually living in pain because of these waiting times, and because this Labour government won't fully nationalise.
But the point of the Labour, the point of what Labour would say, and other governments too. I'm not just defending Labour. I'm defending the Conservatives as well. They would say if the money exists within the NHS to allow a private provider to do that more quickly, the people you know who are in pain could get their knee operation, could get their hip sorted sooner if they went to a private provider, could they not? I mean, I just wonder whether an ideological opposition, which is fine and there's nothing wrong with it, to privatisation or parts of the private sector in the healthcare system is actually a sustainable position, Ollie.
So people can't afford that. People can't afford.
But they're not paying for it.
Except for a lot of rich people, people cannot afford to get their health care.
But you just talked about the NHS, Ollie. You've just talked about the NHS using private providers themselves, and some of that £200 billion plus is given to private providers, yes, but it means people can get operations more quickly. It means those waiting lists can come down. Why are you against it?
We've constantly seen throughout the public sector that outsourcing does not work. That at the end of it, it will cost the taxpayer more than it would if the NHS had done it themselves before. I think this is a clear issue that I think we've seen throughout time, and that across the public sector, across councils, across a lot of what the government funds. It costs more. It costs taxpayer more. You know, as I'm pretty sure you're quite a conservative person. You should be wanting that. I think as well that local procurement rather than building wealth locally is really important.
Why is it that you said earlier on that you felt millionaires and billionaires were to blame? Those are the people who are paying. You know, you may not like the fact that they have more money than you, but they're paying a lot of tax that is funding things like the NHS.
Well, a lot of those people are taxing well, and a lot of those people will want to pay more tax. I think you should have a look into a group called Patriotic Millionaires who want to pay a lot more.
They've every opportunity to do so. They've every opportunity to do so, Ollie. If they want to, they can write a cheque to HMRC, send it to HMRC in Whitehall, and they've every right to do that if they want to do that.
Yeah, clearly, but I think this isn't a problem about individuality. This is a thing about the system as a whole. Realistically, I think a lot of working class people have been dealt the end of this system, and they shouldn't be punished for not being as rich.
But they'd be punished further. Okay, Ollie, but they'd be punished further, and public services would be even worse if we didn't have the tax that millionaires and billionaires pay. I'd love to be a millionaire. I'd love to be a billionaire. That'd be lovely. It'd be great to have all that money. It'd be fabulous. But if we make life even more difficult for those people, well, they're highly mobile. They'll move somewhere else and they won't pay any of that tax. We won't get it.
Well, that's been proven that isn't true. People in the whole, people do not leave. And anyway, I think
there are hundreds of millionaires who have left in the last few years. There are hundreds of millionaires who have left since Starmer has come. What you said just isn't true, Ollie.
Okay, the line that you're peddling has been peddled by think tanks across country, which are funded by billionaires, which are funded by those same billionaires.
What if it's factually correct? Who does it matter who they're funded by if it's factually correct? If you have someone who's a billionaire... Hold on a second, Ollie. Hold on.
It's not factually correct.
Hold on. If you have a millionaire, if you have someone, let's say someone who earns £1 million a year, and they're paying, for example, let's say £460,000 a year, Then they move away because tax goes up even further, and this has happened. There have been hundreds of those people who have, since Starmer came to power and beforehand, because taxation is at the highest level that it has been since the Second World War. If we're saying to those people, you've got to pay more and more tax, what is the incentive for them to stay in the UK? They can go they can go to the Middle East, they can go to America, they can go to lots of different places, because they're, unlike you and me, they're highly mobile, they have lots of money, and they can pay their taxes or lack of taxes elsewhere.
So what you're talking about is a tiny fraction of people who move away. Their assets remain here. They can't take their assets away, can they now?
Well, they can sell their assets if they want to, and many of them have done that. Ollie, it's very interesting to talk to you. I think we disagree, but I really appreciate you giving me a ring, and please do so again. That's Ollie in Manchester there. Peter's in Dorset and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, good evening, Peter.
Hi there.
I think people need to understand, sitting in their living rooms tonight, watching your programme, that we are living in an absolutely fantasy world in this country, thinking that we can possibly do any kind of defence whatsoever to this country. I'm not surprised that Starmer wants to get involved with the French. He wants them to do the dirty work for the UK by running around our waters. And as far as I'm concerned, this country needs to be opening the port Talbot Steelworks. It needs to be building ships like there's no tomorrow. It needs to be building tanks like there's no tomorrow.
Where does the money come from for that, Peter? I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I want, the £28 billion black hole in the defence budget, where do we get that cash for? Because the cash only comes from a few places, other government departments. It comes from putting taxes up, which I don't want to happen. It comes from borrowing money, which is really precarious. The cost of borrowing has come up to a huge degree, or cuts elsewhere.
Well, it won't matter whether it's anything to do with the NHS or the welfare budget or anything else. If we've got Russians messing about with our underwater connections, and we've got Russian forces that are coming on our borders, it won't matter whether you've got an NHS.
Peter, you're absolutely right.
Budget.
I spoke to someone the other day, a military person, and said, look, this is not going to happen, hopefully, and it's completely hypothetical, but if the Falklands were to be invaded right now, we'd be nowhere. They could just take them. That could just happen, because we are nowhere militarily, Peter.
I mean, it's not surprising that Donald Trump doesn't want have anything to do with the Strait of Hormuz. We're a complete embarrassment. We're completely useless. Look what happened to the tug they wanted to send out to the problem, to sort out the problem. It took them a week to get that out. It was having scaffolding.
And then it was having those repairs. Peter, great call. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. Quite a few people are reacting to Ollie. Clayton in Dartford says Ollie sounds as if he believes what Zara Sultana tells him. Interestingly, with your party as well, they've disintegrated. Loads of their leadership, 12 of their leadership council have resigned as well. Another person is Ollie the Green voter, talking total guff. I mean, I'm very, very happy to chat to Ollie at any point, but I do think his arguments don't quite stack up. Debbie says the government doesn't fund, we do. I don't see why I should be funding wasters who think they're entitled to this, that and the other. I pay taxes and that money should be spent wisely and not with contempt. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about EU rules that could well be imposed in Britain under Labour plans, and the Labour Party being accused of another Brexit betrayal after plotting to deny MPs a vote on a new EU sellout. Liam Deacon will join us in just a second. I want your thoughts on it too. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, let's talk about Labour's plans to impose single market rules on Britain without a full vote in Parliament. This is the government introducing legislation which means that once a trade deal has been struck with the bloc, any further rule changes can be rubber stamped by MPs without a debate. This is part of an ambitious set of new deals which could include cars, robotics, life sciences and climate technology robotics, life sciences and climate technology, part of the Prime Minister's reset. Lots of people worried about this, including Andrew Griffith, who is the Shadow Business Secretary. He was on with Ian Collins this morning. Ian sitting in for Jeremy this week and next week. Let's hear what Andrew Griffith, the Shadow Business Secretary for the Conservatives, told Ian.
Well, anyone, whatever your view, should be the believer that Parliament is the body that should make these decisions. We shouldn't be outsourcing them to Brussels, the low or slow growth EU. We're an agile economy. We can once again be one of the most prosperous countries on the planet, but we need to be setting our own rules. No one says to Canada, the thing you need to do, even though you trade a lot with the United States, share a land border, share a language, is take powers away from the Canadian Parliament and hand them over to US Congress. That is exactly what Starmer is proposing for the British Parliament. I think it's wrong. Conservatives think it's wrong. We will reverse that. We do not support that.
Andrew Griffith there, the Shadow Business Secretary. Nigel Farage has responded to this as well. He says this is a backdoor attempt to drag Britain back under European Union control. Accepting the rules without a vote is a direct betrayal of the Brexit referendum and a total breach of the government's manifesto promises. The government and ministers say that MPs will still have a vote on primary legislation to implement each deal as it is signed. The government says any new treaties or deals with the EU will also face parliamentary scrutiny, and Parliament will have a new role in improving new EU laws required under those deals via secondary legislation. Well, Liam Deacon is with me. Liam, thanks for your patience. I do appreciate we're running a little bit late this evening. He's a communications consultant and former head of press at the Brexit Party. What do you make of this, Liam?
I think it's extraordinary, and it's one of those stories that I wish was getting more and more attention. I mean, Brexit was the largest plebiscite in our country's history, and this is one of the cruelest and purest ways we're going to see it betrayed now. I mean, we got details of this about a month ago when Rachel Reeves said that they were going to only join bits of the single market rules that are in the national interest. But she went on, I'll quote this because it's worth quoting. She said, the UK will set its own regulations in, quote, sectors with unique characteristics or strategic importance for the UK, but that should be the exception, not the norm. And I'd like to take her up on that. It should absolutely be the norm that the UK sets its own regulations. That was the very heart and soul of Brexit, that we voted to reclaim this glorious thing called sovereignty. People like to say about, Brexiteers. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, Liam, and it's very, very interesting you mentioned that. And certainly when Nigel Farage says it's a backdoor attempt to drag Britain back, I mean, a lot of people will not get the nuance of this. I mean, I still struggle to understand how parliamentary legislation works, even though I worked in politics for 3.5 years on primary legislation versus secondary legislation. Yeah. It's a really, really complex thing, and then you have amendments and they get dropped and moved, and then you vote on the amendments. Parliamentary procedure has never been my strong point, but there's a lot in it here, and clearly, as certainly Farage and others think, and Andrew Griffiths as well, this is kind of hoodwinking parliamentarians. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
So, I mean, secondary legislation is a part of our system, and it happens in different jurisdictions, and I'm not against that in total. If Parliament, if 650 MPs voted on every single incremental change to the law, especially when technology is moving so quickly, that wouldn't always work. But when you've got something so fundamental as us handing back huge areas of our trade policy and industrial policy to the EU, but MPs should absolutely vote on that. I don't think that should be controversial. You spoke about Andrew Griffiths there. I mean, look, I have nothing against the man personally, but we should remind the Conservatives that they had an opportunity to repeal a lot of these EU EU laws. So when Kemi Badenoch was Trade Secretary and Andrew Griffiths, I think, was City Minister at that point, they were going to withdraw 4,000 EU laws. Okay, and at the last minute, Kemi Badenoch went, no, she got cold feet. I'm not going to do it. The phrase she used at the time is it's going to create legal risk. Okay, and we didn't get rid of many EU laws. And this is the really sad reality of this. Yes, we're talking about absorbing huge numbers of new EU laws, but the really tragic betrayal of Brexit here is not only did immigration go up, but we've kept most of those EU laws. We haven't meaningfully diverged from the EU at all. Brexit has not been delivered.
Was Brexit
in a
worth
meaningful
it,
way.
Liam? This country was torn apart by a referendum. There was a clear majority, 17.4 million people, the largest number of people in this country who've ever voted for anything, voted for Brexit. You're saying it wasn't delivered. Was it worth it? Because we're in, this country is a really divided country at the moment. Part of that was some of the referendums that we went through, Scottish referendum, the Brexit referendum, maybe even the AV referendum, although that's maybe a bit of a stretch. But was it worth it?
I'm going to disagree with that. When you look at the polling about why people feel disenfranchised and why they're unhappy, it's because every time they vote, what they vote for doesn't happen. Yep. Okay, like the immigration is one of the biggest examples of that. They voted for it to come down and it quadrupled.
And to support your point, Liam, 4 times the Conservative Party put in their manifesto that it's going to come down. 4 times they failed on that.
Your listeners will know all of that. And when they vote to become a different jurisdiction to the EU, it doesn't happen. Brexit is not why this is a divided country. This is a divided country because our democracy is failing, because we've given so many powers over to third-party organisations like the EU, but we've also got a domestic problem with quangos and courts absorbing those powers. And this is a really raw example of that. So yes, Brexit as it was delivered right now wasn't worth it. And I'll quickly list this. Like, I actually had a look before I came on your show. What laws have we meaningfully got rid of and changed since leaving the EU? There's been some small change around gene editing, GM crops, financial services. There was the tampon tax, remember, which was an EU law that we couldn't change VAT around tampons. And then there was nutrient neutrality, which people forget came over from the EU Habitats Directive. That's one of those insidious ways that EU law works. When there's a big directive, it gets interpreted by a court, and then you get these granular regulations that stopped 500,000 houses being built in this country, and no one voted for that to happen. But we've really got rid of hardly anything. I mean, and that really comes back to, like, yes, you can argue about, do these individual law changes matter really that much? But there is a cumulative effect that we are living under thousands and thousands of laws made in a foreign country that crush business in this country.
Let's talk about the next. Okay, let's talk about the next element of this, Liam, because what we have is a lot of parties. Well, two major parties. Reform UK, which, if the Sunday Times big poll tomorrow is to be believed, will be the next government of this country. You've got the Conservatives, who are both saying they're going to get out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Is that a panacea? Because what I worry about is, A, it's not a panacea, because there's a lot of that baked into laws already. There are people who are worried we'll have no rights at the end of it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to have a British Bill of Rights and it'll be fine. But the point is that a lot of people feel, I don't think freedom of speech is going to disappear overnight because Nigel Farage Prime Minister. The point is that a lot of people get made these promises by politicians saying things like, oh yeah, okay, well, we've done as much as we can with Brexit, but here's this other thing. Here's the ECHR. If we get out of that, then we'll be free. And the fact is that I'm not sure that's true.
No, you're right. Just leaving the European Convention on Human Rights won't make a huge difference, because, as you say, lots of those laws. We've got the Equalities and Human Rights Commission here in the UK.
Load of case law.
Things like that. But what I can tell you for certain is that Reform UK are aware of this nebulous network effect of these regulations, and they're working on something that they're calling the Grand Repeal Act. And you can Google it. There's been senior people that are now working at Reform, and they wrote about this previously before joining the party in their policy unit. And they are working on something that will come across several large areas, which include reining in employment law, tackling quangos, and also introducing new powers to limit the power of the judiciary to block these changes. And it'll be called the Great Repeal Act. And it will cause an almighty row, and I think there'll be legitimate criticisms about it. Is it centralising too much power in Westminster and things like that? And there will be a heated debate, but they are aware of precisely the point that you're making, and they are already drafting the regulation to tackle that. And this is important, because you're right to say that we live in a divided country. And I really think the reason is people don't feel their democracy is working. Okay. And a lot of that started with EU law. Okay, it started with that cry for sovereignty. And yes, it hasn't happened, but the people people still want that motivating thing behind Brexit, which is sovereignty, and they are going to get it back one way or another. We're going to reclaim our democracy, even if Starmer had his way and tried to get this law through.
Liam, thank you. Communications consultant Liam Deacon there, former head of press for the Brexit Party. Lots to discuss in all of that. I know plenty of people want to get in on calls as well. We'll take some calls after the break. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
MG is in Staffordshire. MG, the mystery of what your name actually is continues, but I know you want to be called MG, and that's fine. Tell us your thoughts, why you've given us a ring this evening.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask you, Peter, being a former politician yourself and so on, and having listened to the conversations which have been presented on your show, where things like knee injuries and knee operations have been mentioned, and despite the increase of in taxes, people still cannot get the relevant treatment. I just wondered what you folks in the studio made of the current situation regarding breast screening, and why, women, with all due respect, the NHS do a fantastic job. It's very lucky that they provide this service, and it's better than nothing. But why is it that women end up having to have breast screening, might possibly have cancer, we don't know, in metal mobile units on car parks, when a man who might have suspected prostate cancer, or a man who hasn't looked after himself and got obesity and probably ends up with all sorts of diabetes and whatever problems, it's perfectly acceptable for them to walk into a hospital.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't have an answer to that.
It feels as though, and I really do feel that if it was men, things would be very, very different. But it seems to be because we're women, women out there just get on with it and don't argue a great deal. Women just have to accept what they are given. And I just feel that, I would like to hear politicians one day say, yes, there has been an increase in tax, but actually we want to show you how your tax is being used. How would you
I totally that I can address, and I think I think you're absolutely right. And what I would love politicians to say is, yes, taxes are high, and we want them to be lower. When we can lower them, we will. But in the meantime, we're going to give you value for money.
Yeah, create screening clinics. We need screening buildings, proper professional buildings, where people don't know what you're going in there for. You could be having an arm screened, you could be having a leg screened, you could be having a breast screen, whatever, the part of your body is screened, where there's that little bit more discretion. Because I think the reason why so many people do not take up breast cancer screening is because they're on a car park.
It's not always in those units, though, is it? It's not always in those units, though, is it?
A lot of them are.
I know a lot of them are, but it's not all of them.
No, it might be. Well, I'm sorry, London might be a very difficult situation, but I would like to see politicians travelling more around the country, visiting these premises, speaking to staff. What would they like to see? Very small units, where also inside the building there is better monitoring of what the staff do, how they treat patients, how they speak to patients, and so on, which you're not always going to get that in a mobile unit.
That's a very, very good point. And I suppose the point is that there are so many women of a certain age and above who need to be screened all the time. Is it better that we at least have those units rather than no units, I suppose? I mean, you can have more of those units that are cheaper than building, a whole new cancer centre. They're also mobile as well, so they can go around and get closer to people in the community. That's maybe the thinking behind it. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
But because of lack of funding, you're missing out on groups of people. I mean, look at Sarah Harding out of Girls Aloud and what happened to her. Look at people like Jade Goody with her form of cancer that was not picked up because they were lower the age threshold. I know you can't cover absolutely everybody, but if you offer the opportunities, and provide a greater service and put more money. Forget these stupid shade islands. Don't give them the money. Put it in the NHS instead. That will be a dead cert for winning the next election.
Listen, thank you. You've made your point very powerfully there. Really appreciate that. MG from Staffordshire there. What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Very interesting point there. We're going to talk in the next hour to a student at a major London university who's been a victim of dreadful anti-Semitism. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. We'll also talk about the Southport murder, and the attack would not have happened if the killer's parents had done what they morally ought to have done. This is an inquiry that has found this. We'll talk about the US and Iran as well. And other people who want to get in on deep fried food as well. Lots of serious issues, but this as well, maybe it is a serious issue. Maybe you think, actually, hold on a second, people should be able to eat what they want and kids should be able to eat what they want, and maybe it's the end of the jam roly-poly is a major issue for you. Whatever you think, whatever is on your mind, whatever's on the tip of your tongue, you give me a shout and we'll talk about it in the next hour. 0344 499 1000. It's great to have your company here in the Evening Exchange. Plenty more to come, so please do get your call in. Let's have a chat.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening, I'm Peter Cardwell here through until 10. Lots to discuss, including the Southport attack would not have happened, says the inquiry chairman, if the killer's parents had done what they morally ought to have done. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what on earth is going on with Iran and what happens next with the Strait of Hormuz. Is there a role at all for our government, for Keir Starmer? What do you think of that? We'll also speak to a student at a leading London university about the scourge of anti-Semitism and what he happened to deal with. If you do not conform to anti-Zionism on campus, you become an outcast, he says. So lots to discuss on all of that. There are lots of people who want to get in touch on so many different issues as well. Migration is a big one. NATO, school meals as well. The fact that the government is changing school meals, the fact that things like jam roly-poly could be a thing of the past. What do you think about that? What do you miss from those school days? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss between now and 10 o'clock, so stay with us here in the Evening Exchange on Talk. Well, the 67 recommendations of Sir Adrian Fulford's Southport attack report are out. The main one is that it could and should have been prevented. He was very critical of the parents of Axel Radicubana, who was 17 years old at the time. He murdered those 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in July 2024. I remember it well. I remember being on air when we were reacting to it, and indeed the day after when it had sunk in for many people, and they were so angry, grieving those beautiful young girls who just wanted to do exactly what they were meant to be doing. They were meant to be having a nice summer. They were meant to be enjoying themselves, and there instead, BB King, who was 6, Elsie Dot Stancombe, who was 7, and Alice Da Silva Aguirre, who was 9, were murdered, and Radicubana avoided a whole life sentence because he was 9 days too young for that. He nearly killed 10 other people. There were some real heroes there, and there were some people who helped, and there were some people who really did not do what they were supposed to do. The taxi driver who brought him there certainly comes in for a lot of criticism in this report, as do his parents particularly, who if they had done what they morally ought to have done, this would not have happened in the view of Sir Adrian Fulford. He was the chairman of the Southport inquiry. This is what he said today.
First, the attack on the 29th of July would not have occurred if AR's parents had reported to the authorities the full extent of what they knew in late July, including on the day of the attack. Second, if the relevant agencies, individually and collectively, had properly managed and responded to the known danger that he posed to others from December 2019 onwards, it is highly likely that this event would not have occurred.
Phase 1 of the inquiry report is out now, and Sir Adrian will have his full report later on, but I mean, pretty damning indictments there. Mike Neville is a retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector. Mike, great to have you on the programme, one of our regular crime commentators here on Talk. He really did not mince his words there, but what happens next? Because unfortunately, these 67 recommendations, hopefully they'll be acted upon, but can something like this be prevented, do you think, in future?
Well, we hear all the time, Peter, don't we, about our lessons will be learned, and then often they're not learned at all. And in the States, of course, a parent can be prosecuted if they allowed this, somebody to go and do a school shooting, something like this.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because one of our texters reminded me earlier, I'd forgotten, that the killer of Charlie Kirk, his father dobbed him in and brought him to the police, did the responsible thing and did the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the States, you can be prosecuted if you do the wrong thing and you don't say anything. In this country, it's really based on what you do rather than what you don't do, unless it's a sort of terrorist attack or something like this. So I think the parents have rightly come in for criticism. And what can we do about it? The trouble is, we let all these people in, like the Abaidi family, the Manchester Arena bomber, and all we're told is lessons will be learned. And I'm afraid, like most of the public, we don't believe that lessons are learned at all.
I mean, it's a really interesting point. And another texter actually earlier on made another very good point and said, hold on, what would have happened if they'd said my son is accumulating knives here? Would he have been given a caution? Would he have been given a custodial sentence? Because the police are so weak on this, the CPS and the justice system are so weak on this, that actually, had they dobbed him in, would it have been prevented? It's a massive hypothetical, but Sir Adrian certainly thinks that this could have been avoided.
Could it have been avoided? If you look again about he was sent to a special school. The head teacher said he was a very violent, dangerous individual, and then she's accused of stereotyping because he's a young black man. So the main focus of the people there was to remove the word sinister about his behaviour. So the whole thing just smacks of this. The whole establishment are committed. We let these people in from all over the world. And then these wicked things happen. We're told that lessons will be learned. But are you confident, Peter, that nothing like this will happen again? Because I'm certainly not confident. And I've got 3 daughters. And I simply don't believe that this is the last time we'll see such a wicked event. And it's the same sort of individuals time and time again. And I grieve for the families. But I'm afraid this is not the last time we're going to grieve.
I think this is sort of thing is very sadly going to happen. In fact, I think worse things will happen before it gets better, very sadly. Let's hear from the Prime Minister making a statement on the first phase of the Southport inquiry. He was in the House of Commons today.
I want to put on record in this House my total determination to make the changes across the entire state that are so clearly necessary to honour the victims, the injured, and the families of Southport. Yeah. Today's report, Mr. Speaker, is harrowing. It is difficult to read, and I cannot begin to imagine the pain upon pain that it will cause the families that it affects. And our thoughts are with them today.
It's interesting the point you make there about in the US, parents of children who carried out mass shootings have been prosecuted on at least 3 occasions. I have this in front of me. In Georgia, Colin Gray was found guilty of murder and child cruelty. Prosecutors argued he was the one person who could have prevented his son, 14-year-old Colt, from shooting 2 teachers dead and 2 pupils at a high school in Winder in September 2024. There are other examples of this as well. We also have a damning indictment of the taxi driver here Ruda Cabana himself, who created significant obstructions to constructive engagement with the agencies involved, and said the couple, the Ruda Cabana family, were too willing to defend their son. We've had some commentators on the programme earlier today saying, well, you know, people always look after their children, but I wonder, I mean, in fairness to the mother, who's a laboratory worker, she said, for our failure we are profoundly sorry. Is that enough? What should happen to them now, do you think? What can happen to them now?
Well, I think the whole lot should be deported back to Rwanda. We simply don't need these people here. They bring nothing of value. All they bring is badness and evil. They've contributed nothing. They were allowed into this country, just like the Abaidi family, and all they've done is brought evil upon us. And you've got the Prime Minister there standing up in the Commons saying, oh, this and that, and we're going to learn lessons. This is the same man who allows thousands and thousands of undocumented young men who could do a similar sort of thing into this country every day. And all we're told is that they'll learn some lessons and to shut our eyes and stop noticing these things. And it is truly dreadful. And as I've just said, I have no faith whatsoever that horrible things like this are not going to happen again.
Well, it's interesting, Sir Adrian, who is the chairman of the inquiry, said the Law Commission should be asked to review the merits of legal reform concerning whether specific categories of persons ought to be under a legal duty to warn about or a duty to report the criminality of another. We have this duty of candour in the public sector, which has been a recent innovation. One of his recommendations said the Youth Justice Board should produce clear practical guidance for parents of children who have been found with a knife or another offensive weapon, including the importance of informing agencies. Why on earth do you need guidance for that? If someone I have a 13-year-old nephew, if I had a sniff of the fact that he had a knife, I would happily ring 999 and dob him in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Peter. But he didn't just have a knife. He'd been looking at all sorts of wicked internet sites. He'd expressed all sorts of bizarre views. But the whole establishment, one had to look at the start of this to see how the police, didn't tell us he had rice in. He didn't have Al-Qaeda handbooks. For 3 or 4 months, we were told this. Oh, it's not a terrorist. Well, why has he got a terrorist handbook? And I think just all the time, the public just see this, and I'm afraid, like many of your viewers and listeners, my head is in my hands. And this inquiry will produce a big report which will achieve very little because it'll happen again.
Mike, thank you. That's Mike Neville there, retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector. The Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Rob Carden, welcomed the findings of the report. He said the force accepts the learning set out in the report. I hate a lot use of the word learning. The force accepts the learning set out in the report in relation to the initial response on the day of the attack and will be considering the recommendations in coming days. Importantly, the report does stress that the response as a whole was well managed and displayed effective interagency liaison. The matters raised for learning did not impact the response provided on the day. Lawyers representing the families of the children who survived the attack, there were 10 attempted murders, of course, as well. They praised their clients for showing courage, strength and honour in the darkest of days. Many of them, of course, giving evidence to this inquiry and reliving that. Nicola Ryan Donnelly, who's a serious injury solicitor at Fletcher's, said the moral failure of Radha Cabana's parents made disturbing reading. It is clear there is a need for whole-scale system reform across health and social care, education and policing. I'm not sure I agree with her. I think there is a moral failure here, and I think a lot of the moral feeling is simply, if someone has a knife, get them to get rid of it, and if you and report it to the police. It's really straightforward. It's really straightforward. If you have a child at home, if you have a grandchild at home, or a son or a daughter at home who's accumulating knives, ring the police right now, and get it sorted out. Let's speak to Beth in Arbroath, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Beth, thank you for your patience. We've kept you waiting a little while. I really appreciate that. What would you like to say on the programme this evening? You're very welcome.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So my question is more about immigration in the larger sense.
Sure.
Especially the last couple of years, there's been a lot of, in the news and everything, there's been a big tendency to sort of blame immigration for everything that's going wrong in the country, long NHS waiting times, lack of access to public housing, lots of different things. And I'm just wondering, I don't personally think that's fair, considering that we're just coming off of over a decade of austerity and cuts to council funding, NHS funding. How can we say that immigration is the cause of all ills when actually statistically the numbers are so small compared to
but it's part of the picture, is it not, Beth? If we had 25 years ago 60 million people in this country, we now have 72 million, and the system, austerity certainly happened, no doubt about that. But in terms of the NHS, for example, NHS England, I know you're in Scotland, but the figure I have on the top of my head, because I quote it very often, is in 2010, when the Conservatives came to power, NHS England had £139 billion a year spent on it. Now it's over 200 billion. So that's gone up. That hasn't been cut. That's been vastly increased. Yet still we have an issue. And clearly more people in the country, wherever they're from, many people come here, they contribute a huge amount. I'm not anti-immigration per se, but if you have more people, there's going to be more stress on those public services, and that's just the way it is, Beth, is it not?
Well, I don't really think this is a fair comparison, considering that you have to look at the funding per capita and the higher inflation. Money today is not worth the same as £1 10 years ago.
Can we agree it's part of the picture? Can we agree it's part of the picture?
Also, as the population rises, under the tax system, everybody's paying taxes. Then you would be making more money.
Beth, do you know what? It's not. I do want to hear what Beth has to say, but it's not a great line. Can we see if we can get her back on a better line? And if it's a better line, I'll take after the break. I promise. Stay with us here on Talk 0344 499 1000.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I'm afraid we have struggled with the phones, and Beth just didn't have a clear line there. She's going to give us a ring another night, and we will prioritise her to get her on the air to hear her views, but sadly we'll just have to leave it for this evening. Thank you to Becca, who's been in touch. She says, so fish and chips and jam roly-poly are off the menu at schools, but they've set free, not to the taxpayer, breakfast clubs with cereal that is packed with sugar. Peter, make this make sense. It's an interesting one, actually, because we have these breakfast clubs, of course. I don't want any kid to go to school hungry, but what happened to a couple of Weetabix in a bowl with a bit of milk? Is that really so expensive? Can parents not do that? So many of them, of course, need to get to work earlier and earlier. But I don't know. I find breakfast clubs, if the government can honestly say in the last 2 years it's one of their major achievements, I think that there are many question marks over that. But when it comes to those school dinners and the jam roly-poly and the rhubarb and custard and all those very not fatty but certainly very sugary desserts going, what do you think of that? Is it fine that happens, or is this another element of British tradition that is going? Some people hate school dinners, of course, and said that the food was horrible. I must say I had a pretty good experience of school dinners, and I rarely turned down a good dinner, as my frame would suggest. Let's talk about American politics now. I want to talk about what Donald Trump is saying. Very controversial. We'll talk about the Straits of Hormuz and the Strait, singular, of Hormuz in a second. But there's been this very controversial image which he put out on Truth Social, Donald Trump, of him as Jesus. He says it's not him. Can we just see this image? And I'll describe it for people who are listening on the radio if you haven't seen it today. It's gone all around, and it basically has America in the background there. Clearly there's the, looks like maybe the Washington Monument or something like that, and the Statue of Liberty, various American landmarks, various people, a woman praying, an American soldier looking up to Donald Trump, a nurse looking up to him, a man on his what looks very unwell on his deathbed, people praying around that, and Donald Trump in a kind of white tunic and red sort of vestments around him, putting with light all around the man's head and with a kind of orb in his left hand, using his right hand on the man's head. I mean, that is how Jesus has been depicted in many, many ways. But Donald Trump denied that was the case. I'm not sure I find that credible, to be brutally honest. This is what Donald Trump said when asked about it in the White House.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and it had to do with Red Cross, as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example, the 11,000, I understand your husband's going through treatment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's going through some very serious cancer treatment, so
yes,
this goes a long way.
Yes, sir, it sure does.
Only the fake news could come up with that. I'm not sure that is fake. I'm not sure it is fake news. Let's ask Matt Belinsky. He is an attorney. He's also host of the Prevailing Narrative podcast. Matt, am I right to be cynical here?
About Donald Trump's supposed explanation for that image? Yes, I think your cynicism
it's pretty Jesus-y.
It's no person who has working vision thinks that's anything other than a depiction of Jesus. Yes.
And what has been the reaction stateside to that?
Like most reactions in America, you've got no shortage of a variety of opinions, and you've got the people who are all, who've historically been aggravated by everything that Donald Trump has done. They're obviously very critical. Then you have many of his supporters that, as once again, so many of these images or kind of satirical social media content that he posts says, what do we even care about? Listen, he does this all the time. It's just a joke or something that's supposed to be taken. But the thing that we have that's a little different now is that there's a pretty significant portion of Donald Trump's former followers who now are a little more skeptical of him, and now are not taking to this image as well as they would have in the past. A lot of people who in the liberal press
you noticing a change? You noticing a change in tone?
Yeah, a little bit, because there's a segment of his followers who had stuck with him for a long time that have kind of been turning on him over the past year, about basically the past year or so. And they have not taken kindly to this image. 2017, 2018, if the liberal press went after him, they said, oh, God, why are you taking this so seriously? You guys just have Trump derangement syndrome. Here in this instance, they're saying, why you're engaging in blasphemy. Oh, this is just another reason why Donald Trump has betrayed us, and they're not as sympathetic to him at this time.
Let's talk about the substantive issue, which is, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, the blockade that is happening, the failure of those negotiations. Let's see what Donald Trump has been saying about that.
I would say it's holding well. Their military is destroyed. Their whole Navy is underwater. You know that. 158 ships are gone. Their Navy's gone. Most of their mine droppers are gone. We have a lot of people, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil, and that will be very effective. But what we want to do is we want to, and again, we don't need this. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait.
Donald Trump speaking there. Matt, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think this very much aligns with the general Trump thesis that the power of the American military can accomplish just about anything if used properly. And he believes that after taking out Iran's Navy, he was not wrong, it's at the bottom of the ocean. Iran's Navy has been wiped out, and America has a very powerful, very effective Navy that, okay, if the Iranian leverage point is blockage of or control over the Strait of Hormuz, okay, well, we'll go reassert control by saying, you've been determining who can get in and who can get out. Well, now nobody can get out, including your ships that are taking oil, which are keeping your coffers full and keeping your economy supported. And physically based on purely military assumptions, it seems like that's a possibility. That's something that can be done. If you look at the history, however, of blockades, they haven't been a singular. The end of most military conflicts has not been a singular function of a blockade or something of that effect. But he's also saying that, listen, you guys are using, the Iranians are being very friendly and very receptive to the Chinese in conducting business with the Chinese through that strait. Okay, well, now your Chinese buddies can't operate through that strait either. And in 10 to 12 days, your economy is going to be sunk. And it's a gamble, but once again, Donald Trump believes that America has not used its leverage point and its military might in a number of different effects.
Is there any sign of diplomacy being used again, or is this hard diplomacy just going to be used for the next couple of weeks? I mean, can you see J.D. Vance getting on Air Force 2 to Islamabad again anytime soon?
Absolutely. I believe that this is in parallel, and once again, both the carrot and the stick, that is the Trumpian approach towards foreign policy. There are active negotiations which have been verified in a big discussion right now, and it seems that the main negotiating point is over how long Iran will, at least as part of this agreement, agree to sunset and put a moratorium on its enrichment of uranium. Right now, the Americans are demanding 20 years. The Iranians are coming back saying they want it to be in a single digit, but there's absolutely substantive and material negotiations in parallel with the blockade.
Tell me your thoughts on JD Vance, because he made very, very clear on a number of occasions that he was in constant contact with Donald Trump. He wasn't going to be thrown under a bus on this one. And 21 hours, yes, it's a long time, but when you have 47 years of diplomatic deep freeze, that probably wasn't going to happen overnight.
Sure. I think that JD Vance, he's in an interesting position, because I think that probably in his heart of hearts, he's less enthusiastic about the entire scenario that the Americans right now are, this entire military adventure, or all the objectives underneath it. However, he still knows that, and he's under no illusions that he's in his position because Donald Trump anointed him his successor and made him the vice president. And at the end of the day, he's going to generally comply with Donald Trump's wishes. At this point, he knows that he's the tip of the spear for American negotiations, and he knows that Donald Trump is going to continue on this path regardless. So the best course of action is for JD Vance to try to be the most effective negotiator and negotiate the best resolution that he can.
Matt, thank you. That's Matt Belinsky. He's an attorney and also host of the Prevailing Narrative podcast. I see David Lammy has tweeted, "Great to catch up with my friend JD Vance today in DC, Washington DC, following his talks in Pakistan. It is vital," the Deputy Prime Minister says, "that the ceasefire continues and we get shipping flowing freely again through the Strait of Hormuz. We continue to work together towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine." David Lammy beaming out of that. I'm sure that's a great and marvellous moment for JD Vance to meet such a great intellectual there. Tony has been in touch with a voice note on migrants.
When is our lily-livered, weak excuse for a Prime Minister going to turn round to Macron and say, any migrants that are coming across the channel from now on, you can have them back the same day? This is disgusting. This country we're becoming an absolute joke. Macron and his counterparts must be all sitting on the other side of the channel laughing up their sleeves at us. It's ridiculous. This can't go on.
Tony, thanks for your voice note. George has been in touch and says, "We've had austerity several times before. We've never had foreign nationals stabbing and bombing us at random. Then, of course, the main issue is immigration." Leslie says, "When you say the Brexit vote tore the country apart, it was torn apart not by the people but by politicians like Starmer, who never accepted the result and never will." Does Starmer think betraying the Brexit vote will increase his and his party's popularity? If so, he is deluded. Lisa's been in touch about Axel Radicubana's family. His family were probably terrified that if they spoke up about their son, he may have killed them. And Brian says, until there is accountability within these organisations, nothing will change. Lots more to discuss on all of that. We'll take your calls right up to 10 o'clock, but I'm going to talk in just a second to a young man who is at a major London university and has been a victim of anti-Semitism. Really interesting story to tell in all of this. One of our big universities, Royal Holloway. We'll talk to Evaldas Barstais in just a second. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Morris, who's been in touch and says, of course it's hard to dob in your own child, but they were afraid of their son. He'd threatened to kill them. The whole family would have been better off if he'd been detained in some sort of institution, but he'd have been released in no time, no doubt in a vengeful mood. That is more on Axel Radicubana. Lots of people want to get in on that. Lots of different calls coming in on Brexit, on NATO, on school meals as well, on anti-Semitism as well, which is something we're going to talk about right now, because an Emerson fellow, this is very very, very good scheme, very talented, intelligent young people who go off, I know most recently, to America, who really care about the Middle East, who really care about often their Jewish heritage, although they're not all Jewish. One of them is Valdis Barstis, who joins me now. He is a student at Royal Holloway University, very talented young man, like all those Emerson Fellows. And he has written a piece previously for the Jewish Chronicle on what happened at Royal Holloway. And I wonder, I read it with great interest. I'm very, very interested in the harassment and targeting that has happened to you. Can you just tell me your story at Royal Holloway? Because we've done some reporting on this programme and on this station about campuses right across the UK. But Valdis, tell me your story.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Peter. I'm finally in my third year of study, so I'm leaving next term. And anti-Semitism at Royal Holloway is nothing new. It's been here since at least 2021 that I know of. That's the earliest case I can recall. But in the past 2 years, it's gotten out of hand. So let me just give you a brief introduction. In my first year, I sort of started getting involved with the Jewish community after October 7th. And almost immediately, once my friends found out that I was Jewish, I was ostracized, subjected to Holocaust jokes and excluded. I was called a genocide supporter and treated as if I was morally compromised. So I was left with no friends by my first year. And then moving on to second year, I started out. And I think that's really when I had a wake-up call. On the 1-year anniversary of October 7th, I woke up in the middle of the night and I checked my phone. I saw there was a notification on the Jewish Society's Instagram page. I opened it and it said, "We're going to blow you up. We're going to blow you up." I checked the account and it looked like an actual jihadist somewhere in the Middle East. And I had no idea what to do. So I called up Community Security Trust. They told me this needs to
Just to say for people who might not know what that is a very, very good organisation that deals with security for Jewish people in this country, the Community Security Trust. Sorry to interrupt you, please continue.
Yeah, no problem. So I called them up and they referred me to Counter-Terrorism Police and Surrey Police. So I stayed up until 5 a.m. for about 5 or 6 hours that night on the phone with police dealing with this incident because we had no idea whether the incident was credible or not. But what's funny is for the police to finish that investigation, it actually took about a year.
And what came of it?
Nothing. The police officer in charge of it requested data from Meta, and I think for a while they forgot to actually address the case. So I was just constantly chasing them up. It led nowhere. There were no arrests made, and they didn't even bother.
And there were lots of other calls to your phone as well.
Yes, so that was in my current year. When I started this year, on the second night, when I moved back into my university accommodation, I received a phone number from a no caller ID. I picked up the phone. They said, "We know who you are. We're your big fans. We've read all your articles." And then they proceeded to go on and tell me my exact movements throughout the day. They had been watching me on campus at Freshers' Fair. They described my actions. They said, "We love your funny little hat," referring to my kippah here. So I ended the call. I was left terrified. I didn't know what to do.
Who did you think they were? Obviously, there's no way to necessarily know. Had you heard the voice before? Do you think they were fellow students?
Well, I sort of guessed they were fellow students, but for the next 3 months, I averaged anywhere from 3 to 10 phone calls a day. Every time they grew more violent, more grotesque. Some of the things I can't even describe on air because...
Was it the same voice?
Yes, it was usually the same two girls, and it just started getting more violent. They said one day on one of the final phone calls, they listed my university address, my exact room number, and the floor which I live on campus. They said they were coming to get me and to basically just wait for them. That's when I decided to change my phone number. But I also had other phone calls from other people, and they were pretending to be university staff, trying to get personal information from me. So I never really knew who to trust on these phone calls. Whenever I got a no caller ID call, or even if they didn't bother hiding their phone ID, I was just left very scared and confused.
What did the authorities at Royal Holloway do about this? What did the police do?
Well, when I reported this to the police, this wasn't my first police report regarding anti-Semitism. It was treated very seriously. The police officer came out to me at 8 a.m. in the morning. She sat down with me for an hour. We spoke about everything, and she said, something needs to be done about this. I'm worried for you, and I'm definitely going to take this up with my sergeant or her boss. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call, and he says to me, oh, sorry about this, we can't really prove anything. Even though you have recordings, the girls could claim that someone else took their phone. There's no real evidence here, even though I had actual recordings and clips of what was said to me. So
that's absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah.
And were the university any use?
No, I think the university, in fact, was even more shameful in the way they acted. So the university managed to find the identity of the two girls, and I was told that they would be talked to and there would be some sort of action that comes out of it. I kept following up, and every single time said, oh, we'll get to it, we haven't done it yet, or we've spoken to them, but I never really got a clear answer. It felt like they were just tossing me around, you know, like I was bothering them. And in the end, this also happened to my friend Brodie Mitchell, who's now going viral on X and in the media. He was actually suspended from the university for calling a keffiyeh, a tea towel, in response to being called a wannabe Jew.
We've covered that story, yes, that is absolutely disgraceful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's being taken all the way to the High Court now. But the university, whenever we report an incident, we never get a clear answer. We're told it's being investigated. We follow up, and then they tell us that they can't share details of ongoing investigation. Nothing ever comes out from it.
What do you think this says, Evaldis? What do you think this shows us about not just our society, but particularly universities, particularly young people? Because there are lots and lots of people who, I'm sure, very legitimately have pro-Palestinian views, that's fine, but there are lots of people who don't have legitimate views. There are lots of people who are praising terrorist organisations like Hamas and Hezbollah, and clearly there are people who are targeting people like you simply because of your Judaism and Zionism.
Yes, so I think it runs deeper than just a problem with the students. I think there's an institutional failure to act. Universities, I think, cater to their students and to their clients. After all, they are businesses. And the majority of my university, the largest practicing religion, keyword practicing, is Islam. They have to cater to their students and to people who keep them in business. And this may sometimes be by, ignoring these sorts of issues. Because if they're seen to act against, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist discrimination, that might not give them the best media attention. And they want to keep their clients, their customers. So I think institutions in the UK, on a more general basis, have fallen victim to this trap where they're scared of what the public will perceive them as. And the second problem is the students themselves. So there's a tiny fraction of students who are a very loud minority who subscribe to radical Islamist views on campus.
And is anything done about that? Is there any way that they're reported, that they are attempted to dissuade from this in any way, to not express these views?
Well, I've reported on several individuals on the past. I have no idea what's happened because I still see them on campus. And just yesterday, I actually exposed messages from our Palestine Society. I'm not sure if you've seen them, but some of them read, hypothetically, if Israel defeats Iran and expands across the Middle East to establish Greater Israel, would you guys go for jihad, or would you stay comfortable in your beds? These sorts of messages are being enabled in these society group chats, and nothing's done about it. If you report it to the SU, it's freedom of speech. But then when you hit back with, like, the Brodie Mitchell case with a keffiyeh comment, you're immediately excluded and suspended for 9 weeks.
And what about that student union for you? Have they helped in any way you? Because of course, if you're not getting the support you require, some support, but not entirely what you require from the police, you've talked about the institution of Royal Holloway not being, in your view, helpful. What about your student representatives?
Well, that's where it gets interesting, because I think the students' union is actually worse than the university. I think the university is quite discreet with everything, whereas with the students' union, I've had so many countless problems. For example, this year, I tried setting up an Israel society, and it took me almost a year to get approved.
That.
Yeah, I submitted the paperwork, and a democratically elected student board decides whether it's ratified or not. And there's only 3 criteria for which a society cannot be ratified: budget constraints, legal issues, or overlap with a pre-existing society. My society was immediately rejected. I was told that there was overlap with the Jewish society, even though we're completely separate. There's Hindu and Indian societies, there's Muslim and Palestinian societies. It's just double standards.
And also a lazy assumption that because someone is Jewish that they are necessarily pro-Israel, exactly. which is in itself anti-Semitic. I wonder, there are many people who might say, why not drop out of university? Why not go somewhere else? Why not try to make your life easier? What would you say to them?
Well, I've definitely had those thoughts about leaving or transferring. It would definitely make my life a lot easier, but I think if I did that, I would just be giving up. I'd be giving into the pressure. I'd be giving into the anti-Semitism. People always ask me, like, about this, why do you put yourself through this? Why do you let them torment you? Just, stay quiet, put your head down and get through your degree. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I'd rather face any, backlash, criticism, whatever consequences thrown at me, than compromise on my Jewish or Zionist beliefs.
But if those consequences, I totally agree with you, and I really admire the bravery and stoicism that you've had over the past couple of years. But if people are threatening you, if people are ringing you 10 times a day, that must get to you.
It did for a while, but I think it's built me up to be a much stronger person. I know I'm not the only person that this is happening to, and other people, I know it's had a much more profound impact on them. But my philosophy is, if there's someone standing up, someone being confidently Zionist, Jewish, then I think that's going to lead to other people speaking up and other people standing up. As I said in my article, every single time, we're proudly Jewish, we're proudly Zionist, it chips away at the fear of culture. It's absolutely necessary to stand for who you are and what you believe in. Otherwise, it's going to be a very bleak outcome.
Tell me about being an Emerson Fellow. What is that? What does it mean?
So the Emerson Fellowship is the flagship program of Stand With Us. You can find Emerson Fellows and Stand With Us across, I think, 9 or maybe more different countries. And we're students at university who are passionate about Israel education and advocacy. We're chosen as student leaders to lead classes, educational initiatives on our campuses, and we get more involved with the organization itself. So we're given opportunities to speak at, for example, I spoke at the House of Lords recently and the Israeli Embassy, sharing a similar testimony to what I'm doing here with you today.
And when you talk to those other students who are at different institutions around the country, and indeed around the world as well, are they telling you similar stories about the kind of treatment that has been meted out to you?
Most definitely. I think it's actually been very nice connecting with students who are going through a similar thing as me, and knowing that I'm not alone in this. So I've got friends at Birmingham, UCL, who are going through identical things, if not worse. My friend Mark at UCL, he exposed the blood libel story. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there was a lecturer teaching that Jews bake matzah from blood, and that just typical old age anti-Semitic blood libel, and he actually recorded that meeting, and Stand With Us helped him expose everything. So they do really fantastic work. They support us, and having that support network around me has just been so much better.
I'm really inspired by what you're telling me. I think there's a lot to be positive about, but there's so much that I'm worried about as well. How do we reverse this? How do we get it back? And what can people like me and maybe my viewers and listeners do to support people like you, Valdis?
I think the most important thing you can do is speak up. listen to Jewish students, listen to Zionist students, because no one else at our universities are listening to us. We are constantly ostracized, and the best way to support us is by listening, I think, and maybe amplifying our voices, sharing what you hear with your friends, family, co-workers. That's the most important thing at the moment.
Evaldis, good luck with your studies. Are you coming into finals now?
Yes, so I'm actually on my break right now, and I'm returning in a couple of... I'm actually at my university right now. I've not gone home yet, but got exams, and then I'm done with.
Well, every good wish with that, and whatever you do next. I'm sure you have a very bright future ahead, and I appreciate you speaking to me so honestly and openly this evening. That is Evaldis Barstes, who is an Emerson Fellow. He's also a student at Royal Holloway University. We wish him well, and it's just an absolutely damning indictment, a dreadful illustration, well, a very good illustration of a dreadful problem, which is how much anti-Semitism there is, particularly on our university campuses. It's not something I'm going to shut up about. It's not something I'm going to stop talking about, because it's right throughout society. It's something I feel really passionately about. I'm not Jewish. I've become friends with a lot of Jewish people, and a lot of people who care about this, particularly since the 7th of October. As I often say, Hamas radicalised me, but not in the way they would have liked. Stay with us. We'll take some calls after the break. Stay with us.
He's just trying to take credit, Keir Starmer, isn't he?
This man is not a leader. He's not the statesman that our country needs. He's failing us at every single level.
Donald Trump understands that Keir Starmer is fundamentally not a patriot.
Yeah.
He's not on the side of the West. He's been appeasing the Iranians in order to shore up his vote in this country.
In front of me is Waitrose, and I'm about to head in there. I literally openly put the stuff in my bag. I nervously walked to the front door, and away we go.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Debbie, who says, my goodness, this poor young man from Royal Holloway, what is going on? They need to leave Jewish people alone. Great interview, Peter. Thank you for that. Thanks also to Nat in Tel Aviv, who says, shocking, just shocking. What an amazing young man. So thank you for that. Let's go to the phones. Kevin's in Basingstoke wants to talk about Brexit. Kevin, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Brexit was a massive betrayal. We were told to leave the EU and get closer to the USA, and Brexit has just severely damaged our country. We can't trust Donald Trump or MAGA. You know, especially with tariffs. We've lost billions because of tariffs. You know, they're not our ally. They're criticising us all the time, talking about invading Greenland. That's just a nightmare.
Kevin, take it away from America for a second. Do you not think any form of Brexit should have happened?
Well, I think we should have been told the truth. We were told that it would be a benefit. We'd be making all these amazing trade deals, but we haven't done any of that.
We've done some trade deals, certainly. I mean, if a majority of people in a democratic society vote for something, surely that's a mandate.
Yeah, but it was a tiny majority, and if they were lies...
It's still a majority.
I know it. I didn't say it wasn't, but I mean, we were told things. We weren't told we was going to leave the customs union or the other. What was the other thing? The customs union or something else.
Isn't it reasonable to suggest that if you say, do you want to leave or remain in the EU, that the customs union would be something that you would leave?
Well, no, because they said we wouldn't. Even Nigel Farage said we wouldn't.
I'm not sure that's true. That's not quite how I remember it, Kevin. But certainly when it comes to Brexit, I mean, the argument many Brexiteers, including one on this programme earlier on today, have said is that if it was implemented properly, it would be better. Now, that's a hypothetical neither you or I can prove. But do you think Starmer is right to try to get back in touch and to do deals with the EU that actually shackle us to a lot of their arrangements, a lot of their laws? Is that fair?
Well, yeah, because it's things like food, farming, things like that. So why? I mean, they've got very high standards. Why shouldn't we want to follow them? And if we want to sell, most of our the EU is still our biggest trading bloc. So if we want to sell our products to them, we have to follow them anyway.
Okay. Kevin, thanks for your thoughts there. I appreciate that. That's Kevin in Basingstoke. Let's go to Ryan in London, who wants to talk about school meals. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, Peter.
Go ahead.
Hello, yeah, I'm actually not from London, I'm from Tamworth. But
from Tamworth. We'll update that in our system. Tell us your thoughts on school meals, and apologies for that.
Okay, I went to school from 1995 to 2000 in secondary school. 95% of the kids in school ate pizza and chips and other fatty foods every single day, Monday to Friday, every single day of the week. The reason why we didn't leave school and become more obese and unhealthy kids was simply because we were active kids at school. We'd play sports after school, we'd go and see our friends, we'd walk for hours, we'd take the bus. Nowadays you've got kids, they just go home, play on their iPads, play on their PlayStations. They don't want to be active.
And their parents as well. Their parents as well. It is the kids, but it's also parents as well who won't let them out. There are a lot of people who say, oh, danger everywhere, we won't let kids out. I mean, is the world more dangerous? Is it more dangerous for kids than it was before? We know a lot more about the dangers to kids, but I mean, surely kids should be allowed to play outside in some way, and there's so many who just don't at all.
Well, that's true, yeah. And again, I think, the safety in numbers, isn't there? So you just do it in a practical way, don't you? You say, look, if you're going to go out, make sure that you've got your friends and stuff with you, and make sure, but, you got your phones and stuff. But I think, didn't they try all of this with Jamie Oliver?
Yeah, there was quite a lot of it was about 10 or 15 years ago, and so many of the problems are still there as well. So, Ryan, when you had school dinners, what did you have? Did you have all that fatty food as well, or did you have something else?
No, but to be fair, we did have fatty food. We had options of other stuff, but we had like I said, like pizzas, chips.
What about the desserts? Are there desserts you would miss that are going to go? Jam roly-poly and spotted dick and suet pudding and things like that?
Yeah, we used to get chocolate hedgehog, which was a favourite. But I don't know if that's still around now. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think what it would do is it can potentially backfire as well, because if you've got a child who's determined to eat fatty foods, he's going to go to school, he's going to refuse the food what's given to him at school, and then when he gets home he's going to overeat on crappy foods and high fat foods.
Yes.
And it's just gonna and in that sense it will backfire, because then someone will potentially overeat, and it just becomes kids get rowdy, don't they?
Well, it's a very good point. It's a very good point, Ryan, and thank you for them. Appreciate that. That's Ryan there from Tamworth. Stephen's been in touch from Belfast. He says, the young man you had on, Avaldis, he's inspirational. Well done for getting him on. Leslie says, what a brave, fine young man Avaldis is. I wish him every good wish, along with his fellow Jewish students. Ernie says, it's so sad listening to Avaldis, the Jewish student, talking about anti-Semitism on campus and what he has to go through on a daily basis. Every person in the world is an individual and thinks and acts differently. You can't tar individuals who belong to certain communities all the same. It's blatant racism, and I don't like the word anti-Semitism. Call it what it is, racism, which has no place in any society. And finally, Fiona says, that young man is a credit to his community, not a face covering in sight, nothing to hide from, no shame on him, shame on all the university staff. Such hate is vile, says Fiona. That is Avaldis, who we spoke to a little bit earlier on. Petri Hoskin is with me now. She's coming up after the news. Hello, Petri. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How was your weekend? All right?
Lovely. And you?
Yeah, not bad, actually.
Although I did go to the theatre thinking I would take a break from everything. And who was there? Kevin O'Sullivan.
Oh, fine. I'm going to be talking about the theatre later.
Oh, very good.
Actually, the Olivier Awards.
Right. Have you won one?
Yes.
Excellent,
obviously,
excellent, yeah.
Obviously, the acting that I have to do here is extraordinary. But no, so we are heading to the Oliviers. We're also heading to Hungary, that extraordinary victory. And what that means...
Have you seen the dancing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been amazing.
Yes.
I mean, and this is a real pivot point. People look back on this in history, and this will become a very important moment. So I want to look at Hungary and what it means for us, what it means for Ukraine. Obviously, this changes everything for Ukraine. What it means for Putin, what it means for Trump, all of those things. So we're going to be talking about that. And what the heck is going on in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, not a huge amount because of these blockades, by the look of things.
But what happens if the Chinese decide they're going to start escorting vessels through the Strait of Hormuz? Because it's them that's benefiting from the oil at the moment. And with Trump blockading that,